Chapter 3560. What's wrong with you? Why do you look like that? Gu Jinglian's expression became even gloomier when she asked that question. This stupid woman actually dared to ask him why he looked like that. This kind of medicine can't be taken casually. His words made Chu Ho even angrier. How dare you say that? If it weren't for you. Chu Ho paused at this point. His face was strangely red and he couldn't continue. If he hadn't acted like a beast that night, she wouldn't have needed to take this kind of medicine. Everyone knew that taking morning after pills was bad for a woman's health. For a period of time, her menstrual cycle was messed up. However, fortunately, her physical fitness was good. She didn't need to take care of herself and slowly recovered. Gu Jinglian said coldly, "You don't have to take it." "What if I'm pregnant?" Gu Jinglian said, "If I'm pregnant, I'll give birth to it." He replied almost at lightning speed. Chu Ho didn't react for a moment and was stunned. When he came back to his senses and repeated his words, Chu Ho was furious. A man is a man. It's easy to say that if I'm pregnant, I'll give birth to it. Gu Jinglian, don't you know how painful it is for a woman to give birth? Moreover, if the child is born, who will be responsible for raising it? The Gu family is so big. Can't we raise a child? In other words, even if she gave birth to a bunch of babies like a sow, Gu Jinglian could raise them with his eyes closed. Chu Ho's mind flashed with the image of her protecting a bunch of piglets like a sow. He shuddered. It was so scary. Chu Ho said coldly, "If I give birth, are you going to be responsible for breastfeeding, keeping watch at night, and changing diapers?" Gu Jinglian stopped talking. Chu Ho snorted coldly. "So, you don't have to be responsible for what you say. When the child is born, you won't be the one to suffer." "I'll take responsibility," Gu Jinglian said out of the blue. Chu Ho was stunned. "What did you say?" Gu Jinglian repeated patiently, "I'll be responsible." Chu Ho felt so awkward that he couldn't say anything. However, from his tone, it was clear that he was serious. This man would never make promises easily, nor would he be like other men, who would use flowery words. However, he would definitely do what he said and never go back on his words. Gu Jinglian walked to the door and stopped Uncle Fu. He instructed him before returning to her bedside to sit down. 10 minutes later, Uncle Fu sent someone to buy a few jars of dark plums. Gu Jinglian took the jars, opened the lids, picked up a plum with a fork, and brought it to her lips. "Eat." It was a harsh sentence, as if he was forcing her to eat it. Chu Ho unhappily took a bite and put it into his mouth. Actually, she didn't particularly like sour food. However, she had been lying in bed with an 4 drip for the past few days. As a result, her mouth felt bitter and astringent. In addition, the nutritious meals that Uncle Fu had prepared for her were rather bland, so there was no taste in her mouth. Hence, she wanted to eat sour food just to stimulate her taste buds. The sweet and sour dark plum kept secreting saliva in her mouth. It was so sour that Chu Ho kept blinking her eyes. Gu Jinglian also picked up a dark plum and put it into his mouth. It was so sour that he frowned. However, after the intense sourness, it was sweet. It was very sweet. Chu Ho spat out the seed and opened her mouth again, indicating for him to feed her another dark plum. Chapter 3561. Xiao Bao was taking an afternoon nap in his room when he suddenly received a call from Lin Shi. He picked up the phone, only to hear Lin Shi mumbling pitifully, "Little treasure. Where are you now?" "I'm in my room." "Well," Lin Shi said bitterly, "I think I'm lost." Xiao Bao blinked and said speechlessly, "Okay, where are you?" Lin Shi had been lost in the Gu residence for 5 days. The huge Gu residence was no different from a maze to him. How big was the Gu residence? Let's put it this way. His parents worked in a factory in North Africa, and the Gu residence was as big as the factory. However, he would never get lost in the factory, not only because he grew up there, but also because the roads in the factory were wide and there weren't many twists and turns. The Gu residence had dozens of courtyards in the front yard and backyard. These courtyards were connected by all sorts of winding corridors. It was no different from a maze. This wasn't the first time he got lost. Fortunately, Gu Jinglian had given him a cell phone. When he got lost, he could call Xiao Bao and Uncle Fu for help. Lin, she said over the phone, I don't know where I am, but I see a rockery and a big pond. There are so many rockery and ponds. I don't know which place you're talking about. There's an ancestral hall here. There seems to be a lot of memorial tablets inside. Ancestral hall. Xiao Bao thought about it carefully and remembered that he had been there twice when the Gu family worshipped their ancestors, so he knew the way. Wait for me at the entrance of the ancestral hall. I'll go find you right away. After hanging up, Xiao Bao jumped out of bed, rubbed his eyes, and ran downstairs. After passing through several courtyards, Xiao Bao finally found the ancestral hall. He saw Lin Shi standing at the entrance, looking a little embarrassed. Xiao Bao walked over and complained, Lin Shi, why are you here? You've been here for a few days, but you still don't know the way? Lin Shi said awkwardly, your house is so big. I get lost every time. The main thing is, I don't remember the way, so I can't tell the direction. Xiao Bao glared at him reproachfully. Lin Shi thought that he had said something wrong and looked at him uneasily. Xiao Bao said, what do you mean by my home? Lin Shi, this is your home too. When Lin Shi heard this, she realized that he was unhappy about this. Her heart warmed and she held his hand. All right. This is our home. I was wrong. Don't be angry. Xiao Bao smiled. Let's go. The two children walked hand in hand to the courtyard, but they heard a commotion not far away. It's the Gong family, quickly go and inform the master. Then, Xiao Bao and Lin Shi saw Uncle Fu rushing to the main building. He was in such a hurry that he didn't even look at Xiao Bao. Xiao Bao looked at the entrance strangely. He saw that among the group of people, only a silver-haired man stood out. He had an imposing aura and was about the same height as Gu Jinglian. He wore a snow-white military-style trench coat and a pair of white combat boots. Every inch of his handsome face was exquisite and impeccable. Xiao Bao's eyes widened. This man was cool and handsome. Chapter 3562. Hearing this, the man turned around and nodded slightly. He instructed a few of his men to stand guard outside the door and said coldly, wait for me at the door. With that said, he followed Uncle Fu to the guest room. When he passed by Xiao Bao and Lin Shi, the man looked straight ahead without looking back. His footsteps were like the wind, messing up Xiao Bao's bangs. Lin Shi was a little intimidated by his aura and asked fearfully, who is this man? Xiao Bao shook his head in confusion. I don't know either. In the guest room, Uncle Fu brewed a pot of Dahong Pao tea and poured 2 cups of tea for Gu Jinglian and Gong Jie. Young Master Jie, what brings you here? Gong Jie took a sip and put the tea aside. He didn't exchange too many pleasantries and went straight to the point. I heard that you just returned from North Africa a while ago. Although his voice was low, he couldn't hide his aura. Hearing this, Gu Jinglian said mildly, yes. I heard about it too. Gong Jie looked at him. The Gu Industries factory in North Africa, Werther, has been bought over by Hurricane along with the land. Since Hurricane bought it over, young Master Jie should know about it. Hearing this, Gong Jie's eyes darkened. Is this true? Gu Jinglian snorted coldly. Even in front of Gong Jie, it was hard to quell the anger in his heart. After all, he had been reluctant to give up that piece of land in Werther. At that time, he was on par with Hurricane. If Gong Fan hadn't been so despicable and ruthless, he wouldn't have taken the initiative to withdraw from the North African market. Gu Jinglian thought that Gong Jie knew about it and still came to the Gu household so brazenly to show off. Thus, his tone was very impolite. Young Master Jie, you don't have to pretend. After buying that piece of land, Hurricane Group is already the overlord of North Africa. Since that's the case, why did young Master Jie come to me and pretend to be polite? Don't tell me that you don't know about this. Gong Jia was wrongly accused. Gong Jia said honestly, I didn't know about this. To be precise, I didn't participate in the discussion. I even objected to the acquisition. He knew very well that monopolizing a market meant that he would obtain unprecedented benefits. However, this also meant that there would be no healthy competition. If it was not run properly, the market would be irredeemably rotten. There were wars in this world because of competition. Humans were also humans, and their survival was built on competition. Without competition, it would be regressing instead. It was no different from the closed-door countries of the Qing dynasty. When he was in charge of Hurricane, he had always considered a positive balance and did not oppress the other forces too much. Although his methods were also ruthless, compared to Gong Fan, they were not as terrifying and aggressive. However, if the pressure was too much, it would mean that there would be resistance. This was not something that he was happy to see. Therefore, he was not the one who initiated the acquisition. What made him even more dissatisfied was that no one in Hurricane knew about this. This matter was decided by Gong Fan directly. He did not discuss it with anyone, not even Gong Xiaoying. However, this was not the main point. The main point was, that child. Gong Jia asked in a low voice, you went to North Africa and saw Gong Fan. Gong Fan? Gu Jinglian did not evade the topic. I saw him. You saw him? Gong Jia stood up excitedly. You really saw that child? Gu Jinglian raised his eyebrows. Why? What's with that child that made young Master Jia so excited? Chapter 3563. Have you seen his true appearance? Gong Jia asked again. When Gu Jinglian heard this, he picked up his teacup and casually picked up the lid. After taking a sip, he said calmly, yes, I did. What does he look like? I've only seen him once. I can't remember what he looks like. Gu Jinglian said truthfully, because that child has always been wearing a cloak and a big hat. He has never shown his true appearance to anyone. Gong Jia heard this. Indeed. He had seen Gong Fan once, but from a distance, he saw his back view as he boarded the ship. It was so familiar, but he could not see his face. He only saw that he was wearing a wide fur coat, like a big cloak, and a hat, so he could not see his true appearance. In fact, not to mention outsiders, even the people in the group had not seen his true appearance. It was said that those who had seen his true appearance had been shot to death on the spot. This was Gong Xiaoying's order. Therefore, Gong Jia had always been very suspicious. What was the reason for protecting a child to the point that even if someone saw his face, they would immediately make this person disappear from this world? How unpresentable was he? He could not help but be a little suspicious. You really don't remember? Gu Jinglian said coldly, I don't know how to draw portraits, and I can't describe him roughly. But if you take out a photo to compare, I might be able to recognize him. The reason why he was so calm and composed was because of the man's not-too-tough stance. The Hurricane group and the Gu family were not at odds with each other. It was just that such a thing had happened. The Hurricane group had violated Gu Jinglian's interests. It would be hypocritical to say that he did not bear a grudge. Gu Jinglian was very vengeful, and Gong Jia was an arrogant master. He had never taken the Gu family seriously. However, such an arrogant man did not have as high a stance in front of Gu Jinglian as before in order to inquire about the child's whereabouts. This meant that the child was very important. And Gu Jinglian was the only person who had seen the child and was still alive. To put it bluntly, he was the only lead. When Gong Jia heard this, he immediately took out a pocket watch from his chest and opened it. There was a picture embedded in the pocket watch. He walked over and handed the pocket watch to Gu Jinglian. He asked, take a look. Is this the child? Gu Jinglian took the pocket watch. In the photo, there was an innocent child smiling at the camera. He squinted his eyes and smiled at the camera, looking pure and cute. Yun Tianyu. Indeed, he looked exactly like that child. Gong Fan was Yun Tianyu. The more he thought about it, the more terrifying it was. Gu Jinglian's lips curled into a smile. Didn't I hear that the child disappeared in an accident? It's rumored that he's already dead. Gong Jia clenched his fists. We can't come to this conclusion without seeing the corpse. Yes. If he's alive, we can't find him. If he's dead, we can't find his corpse. It's hard to say whether he's dead or not. Gu Jinglian closed the pocket watch and threw it back to Gong Jia. He asked coldly, what if I say that the child might not be dead? Gong Jia was stunned when he heard this. You mean, young Master Jia is looking for me because everyone who has seen the child is dead, including my subordinates. They all died in the child's hands. Even if it was not Gong Fan's order, these people's lives were still his. He continued, however, the Hurricane Group didn't have any disputes with the Gu family in the past, but it does now. The Hurricane Group has caused such a huge loss to the Gu family. How should we settle this debt? Chapter 35-64. I don't care about the value of that piece of land. The problem is, why did that child buy that piece of land? Young Master Jia should know what he's doing. Gong Jia was silent for a long time before he returned to his seat and smiled. Young Master Gu is just worried that Hurricane will use that piece of land for experiments. When the time comes, they'll become the overlord in the future and threaten the Gu family's land. The world is bustling, and I come for benefits. The world is bustling, and I come for benefits. Young Master Jia should understand such a simple logic. Gu Jinglian had made it so clear. If Gong Jia still did not understand, then his title as Hurricane's chief commander was just an empty title. In other words, Gu Jinglian was implying that the Gu family's losses were small, but if Hurricane grew too big in the future, it would be lonely at the top. It would not be beneficial for Hurricane and the Gu family. Similarly, he also deliberately revealed that the child he saw in North Africa might be Yun Tianyu. However, Gong Jia still wanted a definite answer. He said, Hurricane will definitely compensate the Gu family for their losses. However, before that, you have to give me a definite answer. Is that child called Gong Fan really Yun Tianyu? I don't know. Gu Jinglian continued, no one dares to say such a thing, but the child I saw in North Africa has the same face as the child in the photo you showed me in your pocket watch. Upon hearing this, Gong Jia was so agitated that his whole body trembled. It's Yu. The legendary son of ghosts of Hurricane Group, that mysterious young man, is really Yu, who went missing in that accident. Gong Jia clenched his fists, not knowing if this was a good or bad news. If it's Yu, why doesn't he know how to go home? Does he not want home, daddy, mommy, and brothers and sisters? If it's not Yu, why do the two children have the same face? Gu Jinglian continued, based on his appearance, the child is about 9 years old. 9 years old. Gong Jia grasped another piece of information. 9 years old. When Yu went missing, she was 8 years old. It had been more than a year since she went missing. Everything seemed to match. He didn't believe in such a great coincidence. Hence, he firmly believed that the mysterious youth called Gong Fan must be Yu. Gong Jia came to another conclusion. For the past year, Gong Xiaoying had been hiding Yu in Hurricane, and no one knew about it. Why is Yu in his hands? What did he do to Yu this time? Yu, who had been missing for a year, had turned into Gong Fan. Why had he become so ruthless? Gong Jia could not figure this out no matter how hard he tried. But one day, he was almost 100% sure. Yu was Gong Fan. Gong Fan was Yu. When he found out, Gong Jia was extremely excited. For the past year, he had not stopped looking for Yu. However, he had not found him or his corpse. Yun Shishir missed her son too much and was depressed. If it weren't for Xiao Yichen and Yueyao, she might not have been able to walk out of this trauma. Gong Jia stood up and said to Gu Jinglian, young Master Gu, sorry to disturb you. He turned around and left in a hurry. Gu Jinglian watched Gong Jia's back coldly. He gently blew on the surface of his tea and took a sip. In the past, if the Gong family came looking for him and asked about this matter, Gu Jinglian would have treated it as if it had nothing to do with him and would have kept quiet. However, things were different now. Chapter 35-65. Perhaps it was because she was worried and put herself in his shoes that her heart softened a little. Gu Jinglian put down his teacup, slowly stood up, and walked upstairs. When Gong Jie heard the news, he did not immediately look for Gong Shaoying. Since his father had deliberately hidden Yu Yu, named him Gong Fan, and isolated him from the world, it meant that his father had other intentions. If he found his father, Gong Shaoying might not admit it. Instead, he would be even more guarded. As such, it might be even more difficult to find Yu Yu. The most strange thing was that if Gong Fan was really Yu Yu, why would he be loyal to Gong Shaoying and not want to come home? Even if Yu Yu did not have the ability to leave Gong Shaoying, given Yu Yu's personality, he would not be so loyal to Gong Shaoying. Moreover, all along, Yu Yu had done things that went against the original intention of the Heavenly Eye plan. Back then, Yu Yu proposed the Heavenly Eye plan to control the war by controlling the information technology in the sky to suppress the war. Gong Shaoying did not agree with this idea. But now, Gong Fan was going to start, sow discord, and create a war. His Heavenly Eye plan was made purely for killing. This was not Yu Yu. This was a demon. If he was really Yu Yu, how did he become like this? Gong Jia was heartbroken, but he could not think of a reason. He did not tell Yun Shishir about this immediately. After all, before this matter was confirmed, he did not want her to be shocked and have too much hope. If something happened then, he was worried that she would not be able to accept it. Back then, when she walked out of the shadow of this matter, he saw how much pain his sister was in. Therefore, Gong Jia left the Gu family and went to the Xingyu Financial Group first. Mu Yaja was in the company. Gong Jia found his office, went in, and got straight to the point. Mu Yaja had just finished a meeting. Jiang Shen and Lu Jinyu were also in the office. Jiang Shen was a little surprised to see Gong Jia in such a hurry. What's wrong? I have something to discuss with you. What is it? Yu Yu might still be alive. The man furrowed his brows when he heard that. I know. However, we still haven't found his whereabouts. He had never given up on searching for Yu Yu's whereabouts. Even though searching for a child was undoubtedly like searching for a needle in a haystack, and the cost of searching for a person every day was very high, no one was willing to give up. That's exactly what I'm here to discuss with you, said the man. He sat down on the sofa, casually picked up the cup, and drank the tea in one gulp. At the side, Jiang Shen saw that Gong Jia was holding his teacup. He frowned and raised his hand, wanting to say something but hesitated. However, due to Gong Jia's abuse of power, he did not dare to say it out loud. He heard that this brother-in-law of his had a serious case of mysophobia. He was afraid that he would be beaten to death by Gong Jia if he said anything. I might have found out Yu Yu's whereabouts. Mu Yaja heard this and reacted for a few seconds. He stood up abruptly. What did you say? Gong Fan. Gong Jia said a name. A few days ago, there was a war in North Africa. The Gu family's Werther was acquired by hurricane. I remember mentioning this to you. Okay. Mu Yaja asked again, what's the connection between these two matters? Chapter 35-66. My father said that this child was left behind by him. But from what I know, it's not possible that this child is my father's direct descendant. So, you suspect that it's Yu Yu? Yes, that's my initial suspicion. Gong Jia analyzed further. Coincidentally, I heard that after Yu Yu went missing, this child was with the Gong family. It said that my father arranged for him to recuperate on a private island. This means that this child's health isn't good either. These characteristics are consistent with Yu Yu's. I heard all of this from others. Mu Yaja asked again, do you have any concrete evidence? Jiang Shen and Lu Jinyu listened quietly from the side, unable to express any opinions. Gong Jia continued, Gu Jinglian just returned from North Africa. He's the only person who has seen that child and is still alive. What do you mean? The Gong family has ordered that anyone who has seen the child's face is dead. This means that my father has protected him very well. Hence, no one knows what he looks like or who he is. As Gong Jie spoke, he frowned and said, "Some time ago, Hurricane acquired Weyert. I heard that it was a forced acquisition. Logically speaking, given Gu Jinglian's character, he would never give up that piece of land. I'm guessing that Gong Fan must have used something to threaten him and forced him to sign the agreement. As for why he didn't kill him, I don't know either." "Are you sure?" "It's precisely because I'm not sure that I didn't tell Shishir about this immediately. I'm worried that if that child isn't Yu, it'll be another disappointment." Mu Yaja nodded as well. "We have some leads on this matter. Let's keep it from him for the time being." "Wait," Gong Jia suddenly stood up. Suddenly, he thought of something and his expression became serious. Mu Yaja saw that he looked nervous and didn't say anything. He was worried that he would disturb his thoughts. He must have found some useful clues again. Gong Jia turned around abruptly and glared at him. He suddenly said, "Lisa." "Alice." "What?" "I remember that there was a long period of time when Alice wasn't at the headquarters. After Yu went missing, there was no news of her at the headquarters. I don't know where she went. If Yu was really brought back to the Gong family by father, then he must have been injured. Plus, his body needs to be nursed back to health, so he must need someone with great medical skills to look after him at all times." "Alice is a doctor?" "Yes, she's a medical prodigy from Hurricane." "Who is Lisa?" "She used to work for me, but I sent her to Yu to be Yu's personal bodyguard. I haven't seen her in a long time." Mu Yaja said, "If we find Alice and Lisa, we might be able to get some clues. I can't find any traces of Lisa, but Alice is in Hurricane now. If I go back and ask her, I might be able to get some information." Mu Yaja nodded. Gong Jia left the capital. He took a private jet and rushed back to Hurricane's headquarters overnight. Gong Shaoying wasn't on the island. He found Alice. When he saw her, she was researching medicine in the laboratory. Alice was surprised to see him back. "Why are you back?" Gong Jia smiled and said, "I wanted to have a drink with you." "Why, are you busy?" Chapter 3567. In the pub. When Gong Jia took out the red wine that he had kept for many years, Alice could not help but feel flattered. "I see that you've been hiding these wines well. Why are you willing to take them out to drink now?" Gong Jia smiled and filled her glass. Alice smiled and took a sip from the wine glass. Her mouth was filled with its mellow fragrance. "You didn't come back in such a hurry just to have a drink with me, did you?" Alice teased, "Don't tell me you came back because you missed me." Gong Jia was used to her teasing, but now, he was not in the mood to chat with her. He said bluntly, "I came back to ask you something." "Okay, go ahead. I'll answer whatever you ask." As Alice spoke, she sipped the rim of her glass and sized him up. Gong Jia went straight to the point. "Some time ago, you disappeared for a long time. No one knows where you went." Alice's hand that was holding the wine glass suddenly paused as her gaze froze. Gong Jia looked into her eyes seriously and said word by word, "You would never leave the headquarters for no reason. There must be something special, and you had to hide this from everyone. Where did you go?" Alice did not speak. "You can't say?" Gong Jia narrowed his eyes and asked again, "Then let me ask you another question. Gong Fan, who is this child?" Alice's fingers that were holding the wine glass stiffened. Gong Jia observed the change in her expression and her stiff knuckles and understood what was going on. Alice asked, "Gong Fan? Why are you suddenly asking about him? No one in Hurricane knows about this child's background. You know. Alice, you know that the mouth can lie, but the eyes can't." Gong Jia said expressionlessly, "At this point, are you still trying to hide it from me? If I wasn't confident, I wouldn't have come looking for you. Since I've found you, I'm 90% sure that Gong Fan is Yun Tian Yu, am I right?" Alice suddenly stopped talking. She said with a pale face, I don't know anything. Do you really not know anything, or is it because father told you to keep it a secret? Alice was speechless. Her feelings told her that she could not lie to Gong Jia. However, her rationality reminded her that she had to keep this a secret. However, he also felt heartache. For Yu, and at the same time, for Gong Jia. Alice put down her wine cup and suddenly said, Gong Jia, as a friend, can I remind you to persuade your sister to return to the Gong family and acknowledge her father? Blood is thicker than water and is connected by blood. How can a biological daughter not acknowledge her father? Gong Jia narrowed his eyes, his expression a little gloomy. Alice, are you implying that father hid Yu as a punishment for sister? Alice looked away in a panic. I didn't say that. Gong Jia suddenly grabbed her chin and forced her to look at him. Alice, look into my eyes. Alice looked up at him. Gong Jia said word by word, Alice, if you lie to me in the slightest, you'll regret it. Gong Jia, do you know that we've been looking for Yu like crazy? Chapter 35-68. Alice hurriedly said, Gong Jia, calm down. How can I calm down? Gong Jia retorted angrily. If you tell me that because my sister didn't acknowledge him, because of this matter, you hid Yu by your side as a punishment, that's simply unreasonable. Things aren't what you think. Alice also stood up and said agitatedly, there's no punishment or targeting. It's just that. Gong Jia stared at her. Alice, you've never been a mother before. You don't know what the pain of losing a child means. Alice stared at Gong Jia with her mouth agape. Suddenly, she felt a sharp pain in her heart. She clenched her fists and suddenly said self-deprecatingly, I'm afraid I won't have the chance to be a mother in this lifetime. However, that doesn't mean that I can't understand how it feels to be a mother. Gong Jia was also stunned. He knew that his unintentional words had hurt her. Alice was infertile. Before she came to Hurricane, she was an ordinary doctor. In order to research a vaccine, she did not hesitate to use herself as an experimental subject. She did not expect that the experiment would fail and the virus would backfire. She was infected with the virus and was finally out of danger after a few days and nights of emergency treatment. Because of this, she was expelled from the hospital. Because of the virus, she was infertile for the rest of her life. This almost became a thorn in her heart. I'm sorry. It's okay. It has nothing to do with you. She must have thought of the fact that she was infertile. Gong Jia did not mean that in his words. Gong Jia sighed. Forget it. Since you don't want to say it, then forget it. He was about to leave when Alice suddenly spoke. I'm curious. How did you suspect that Gong fan is Yun Tianyu? Gong Jia paused in his steps and turned around with a smile. Direct and accurate. Combining the clues, Gong fan's identity was indeed very suspicious. Alice said, sit. Hearing this, Gong Jia did not say much and just sat down on a chair. Just as he sat down, Alice suddenly asked curiously, don't you suspect that Gong fan is Yun Tianyu? Why didn't he go back and look for you guys? I still can't explain this matter to this day. Could it be amnesia? Alice smiled and picked up the goblet. She drank the wine in the goblet in one gulp and finally decided to be frank. Perhaps it was the man's words that had finally touched her. The pain of losing a child, as a woman herself, she could not bear to see her flesh and blood being separated from her. Alice said, You didn't lose her memory. Hearing this, Gong Jia raised his head abruptly and glared at her. So, you admit that Gong fan is Yun Tianyu? Yes. Alice nodded frankly. Gong Jia, you're so smart. You already have the answer in your heart. You ask me because you trust me. After so many years of friendship, I can't let you down. Gong Jia did not know whether to be happy or worried when he heard this. He was happy that Yu was still alive. What Alice said must be true. No matter what, it was a blessing in disguise that he was still alive. However, he was worried that Yu had become like this, which made him extremely heartbroken. Just the fact that he had accepted the name Gong Fan was puzzling. He has already forgotten about you. Chapter 3569. What? Gong Jia widened his eyes in disbelief. That's impossible. It's fine if he forgot about me, but how could he forget about his beloved mommy? Could it be that his brain? There's nothing wrong with his brain. The so-called memory loss is not what you think it is. Alice's expression was calm, but there was a hint of guilt in her eyes. Gong Jia did not say anything. He looked at her, waiting for her to tell him everything. Alice took a deep breath and said honestly, I hypnotized him. Hypnotized? Do you know about deep hypnosis? Gong Jia was so shocked that he was speechless. He suddenly remembered that when a person wanted to leave the hurricane group, they would use deep hypnosis to erase all memories related to the hurricane group. On one hand, this was to protect the interests of the hurricane group. On the other hand, the memories related to the hurricane group were too dark. If the person wanted to leave the group and return to a normal life, these memories would be a burden. Hence, deep hypnosis could erase a lot of memories. Such hypnosis had always been carried out secretly by Alice. Gong Jia had always known about hypnosis, but he did not know that the person who carried it out was Alice. So, you hypnotized him? Yes. How did you hypnotize him? Gong Jia asked agitatedly, can the erased memories come back? Yes, but it's very difficult. Not only were Yu's memories erased, but his first personality also disappeared. Personality? You didn't know that Yu has two personalities? I didn't know. Alice explained, he has two personalities. One is the most innocent side, like a piece of white paper, spotless. The other is the dark side, evil, like a demon. Gong Jia was stunned. So, you erased his first personality and he became like this? You can say that. Alice analyzed Yu's personality for Gong Jia. Yu's childhood was spent in happiness and darkness. The happiness was that even though he grew up in a single-parent family, Yunshishir gave him a lot of love and companionship. However, the darkness was that Yun Na and Li Qin's insults and scoldings gave birth to the hatred in his heart. The two personalities existed independently and did not interfere with each other. Back then, when Yu dealt with Yun Na and Li Qin, the first personality did not know about it. He only vaguely knew that he seemed to have done something earth-shattering. One was innocent, the other. One was an angel, the other was a demon. Back then, when she sealed Yu's memories, her first personality was also destroyed by her second personality along with the memories. The memories, but the personality. Even if the memories were recovered, the first personality would not come back. After Yu became Gong Fan, he was completely dark. He was ruthless, black-bellied, and would do anything to achieve his goals. However, Yunshishir was still the white moonlight in his heart. However, even Yunshishir would not be able to awaken his first personality. There was no such thing as reviving a destroyed personality. Chapter 3570. You should be apologetic. If I didn't mention this matter, how long were you planning to hide it from me? Alice said weakly, this was your father's request. As his subordinate, I had no choice but to carry it out and keep it a secret. Now that I've told you this secret, I've already broken the rules. Gong Jia clenched his fists and trembled in anger. Why did he do that? He really could not understand. What was the meaning of Gong Xiaoying doing this? He intends to use Yu to deal with Xingyu. Deal with Xingyu? Gong Jia's eyes were filled with shock. He knew that his father hated Mu Yaja to the core, but he did not expect him to be so cruel as to use an innocent child to deal with Xingyu. When the time comes, when Yu deals with Xingyu, he'll use this as a threat to make Yunshishir return to the Gong family. Doesn't he think that he's being cruel? Jia. Alice said calmly, do you think that with your father's status, he's in a high position and no one has ever dared to go against his words? In his mind, there are no rules about right or wrong. In his mind, he doesn't care who's right or wrong. No one can stop him from getting what he wants. He loves Yu, but in his mind, he doesn't think that it's a mistake for his grandson to return to the Gong family. However, if he doesn't use this method, he won't be able to keep anyone. Whether it's Yun Shishir or Yun Tianyu, he feels lonely, but other than power, he has no other means to get his daughter back. When love reached the depths, in a certain aspect, this love would change its form and flavor. Gong Xiaoying was wrong, but Alice understood. Gong Xiaoying was hateful, but he was also pitiful. Yu Yu is the most pitiful one. Gong Jie said, he didn't have any choice and had his memory cruelly erased by you. Do you know who is the most important person in his life? Alice didn't make a sound. His mother. Gong Jie continued, he regarded Shishir as more important than his own life. Erasing his memory is even more cruel than killing him. Alice was so shocked that she almost suffocated. Indeed, ever since Yu Yu's memory was erased, he had become a completely different person. He was a true devil. If Shishir saw this, she would be very sad. Gong Jie didn't even know how to mention it to him. I want to see him. Gong Jie suddenly said, let me see him. You can't see him. Your father protected him very well because he was worried that you would bring him back. Still, even without Gong Xiaoying's interference, the current Yu Yu may not be willing to leave with you if you want to take him away. Gong Jie smiled. I know. Then, so, if I borrow you, maybe you can see him. Alice was stunned. She immediately understood what Gong Jie was referring to. I've been investigating your recent whereabouts. You disappear for a period of time in the middle of every month. I'm guessing that you must have gone to the island during this period. Alice did not say a word. Gong Jie held her hand tightly. Bring me to him, Alice. Chapter 3571. She looked up and said calmly, okay, I'll take you there. However, you need to be prepared. At least, when you board the ship, you can't reveal that you're the crown prince of the Gong family. There were still more than 10 days until the middle of the month. Gong Jie and Mu Yaja had a video call over the ocean. When Gong Jie found out about this, he said that he had confirmed that Mu Yaja was Yu Yu and that Alice would bring him to see him in the middle of the month. Mu Yaja expressed that he wanted to go too. Gong Jie laughed. Brother-in-law, don't joke around. You're the most dangerous person in Hurricane. You can't even get on the ship. Mu Yaja raised his eyebrows. Okay, it's fine if I don't go. However, if Xiao Yichen goes, it shouldn't be a problem. Gong Jie immediately understood what Mu Yaja meant. He frowned and thought about it carefully. I understand your plan. Okay, then I'll send Xiao Yichen to your place 3 days in advance. Okay. After ending the video call, Mu Yaja stood up from the desk. After hesitating for a long time, he finally decided to mention this matter to Yun Shishir. Yun Shishir was reading a script in the bedroom. Mu Yaja pushed the door open, gently knocked on the door, and walked into the room. When she heard the sound, she looked up. When she saw him walking in with a serious expression, she became very nervous. What happened? Mu Yaja sat on the side of the bed silently. He crossed his legs elegantly and said in a deep voice, there's something I want to tell you. However, you have to stay calm. Don't be nervous and don't get agitated, okay? Yun Shishir laughed. Why are you so serious? What's the matter? Don't worry, I won't get agitated. Mu Yaja smiled and stroked her hair gently. Yu Yu, just the name that escaped from his thin lips made her face turn ghastly pale. Ever since Yu Yu went missing, this name had become an unspeakable pain in her heart. At the mention of this name, Yun Shishir's heart ached. Why, did you mention him? Yu Yu is not dead yet. Yun Shishir couldn't react for a moment. It was only after she had a hard time separating the 5 words from each other and repeatedly comprehending them that she was stunned and suffocated. He's not dead? Yun Shishir immediately sat up and stared at Mu Yaja in disbelief. Is this true? Don't lie to me. It wasn't easy for her to pull herself out of despair. Now, she couldn't take a second blow. Mu Yaja's lips curled into a smile. Do you think I'll joke about this? Shao Jia was the one who told me that Yu Yu is not dead. He's not dead. Then where is he? At the Gong residence. Yun Shishir's expression froze at once. He was hidden by your father. He changed his name and disappeared without a trace. It's impossible. Yun Shishir smiled weakly. Could you be mistaken? Yu Yu is at the Gong residence, but it's been so long. Why hasn't he returned home? He was hypnotized and lost all his memories. He even forgot his own name. Muyaja continued, he also forgot about you, forgot about me, forgot about Xiao Yichen, forgot about Yue Yao. Yun Shishir gasped and shook her head in disbelief. I don't believe it. How could he have lost his memories? This was something that only appeared in movies, but it actually happened to her. It was unbelievable. Chapter 3572. Listen, Shishir. I'm just letting you know about this, but you have to stay calm. Don't think too much. Leave this to me. I can handle it. But, Muyaja held her shoulders and asked seriously, do you trust me? Yun Shishir looked into his eyes and was silent for a long time. Then, she suddenly said, of course. You're my husband. How can I not trust you? She hugged him tightly. She didn't know whether to be happy or worried about this news. Her eyes were a little red. She was happy that Yu Yu was still alive. As long as he was still alive, it was a blessing in disguise. However, she was worried that she didn't know when Yu Yu would be able to come home. Yun Shishir walked into the baby's room. Yue Yao was lying in the crib, fast asleep. There was a small night light above the crib. It was soft but not glaring. It shone on Yue Yao's tender little face, which was as tender as white jade. Yue Yao would be 2 years old in a few months' time. She wondered if Yu Yu would be able to come home on that day. Yun Shishir looked at Yue Yao's neck. There was a necklace around her neck. It was made by Xiao Yichen. During the accident, Xiao Yichen had been holding tightly onto the 2 purple crystals that Yu Yu had given him. He made 2 necklaces. One was for himself, and the other was for Yue Yao's neck as a memento. After Yu Yu's accident, Xiao Yichen had matured overnight. He had transformed from his childish self into a mature big brother. Xiao Yichen dreamed of Yu Yu. Yu Yu said to him, when I'm not around, you have to take good care of Mommy and Yue Yao. He had always engraved these words in his heart. Xiao Yichen believed that Yu Yu was definitely still alive. The telepathy between the Gemini twins told him that Yu Yu wasn't dead, but he didn't know where he was. However, his ability was limited. He didn't know how to search, but he never gave up. Yun Shishir smiled. Yue Yao, I remember that the first word you learned to say was brother. You really want Yu Yu to come back, don't you? Yu Yao's eyes were tightly shut, but her pink lips were slightly curled up. She was clearly having a sweet dream. Xiao Yichen stood at the door but did not enter. Instead, he quietly leaned against the door and looked at his mother, who was squatting by the crib and talking to Yue Yao with a gentle expression. He smiled. Muyaja had already told him about this. When he found out that Yu Yu was still alive, he was both surprised and not surprised at the same time. His daddy said that Gong Jia would bring him to see Yu Yu in the middle of the next month. At the same time, he also gave him a very important task. Gong Jia would think of a way to bring Yu Yu back. Xiao Yichen would stay on the island as Gong Fan and replace Gong Fan for the time being. Xiao Yichen gladly agreed. Even if he was trapped on the island, he still had a way to come back. However, he was more worried. If Yu Yu was brought back, would he be able to regain his memory? Xiao Yichen wasn't sure about Yu Yu's current situation. He also didn't know if his so-called memory loss could be recovered. He only hoped that his uncle would bring Yu Yu back to the Mu family. At least, Yun Shishir could wake him up and help him regain his memory. Mommy, Xiao Yichen called her softly. Yun Shishir turned around and saw him standing at the door. She immediately wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes. You're not asleep yet? Yes, I was passing by and saw that the door was open. Chapter 3573. In the middle of every month, Gong Fan would return to Ashland Island with Lisa. The medication that Alice had concocted could only last for about 30 days. She had to renew the medication every month. His sleep condition was very bad. He had insomnia, many dreams, and nightmares. His mental strength was also very weak. If not for the special sleeping pills that Alice had concocted, it would be very difficult for him to fall asleep peacefully. Other than that, his body also needed regular checkups. He returned to Ashland Island before the middle of the month. Just as he returned to the island, Lisa received a call from Alice. Alice said that she would arrive at the island early the next morning. Lisa could not help but feel a little suspicious. Originally, Alice would arrive on the 15th of every month. Tomorrow was the 12th. What was going on? Alice explained that there was a new batch of medication that had been improved and would replace the previous batch. Lisa no longer doubted him after hearing that. Before this, Xiao Yichen had already disguised himself and sneaked onto the ship that was heading to Ashland Island. It would take an entire night to reach Ashland Island from the hurricane headquarters. Alice's makeup skills were top-notch. She applied makeup on Gong Jia and Xiao Yichen and easily fooled them. After all, with Alice's face, she would not be put in a difficult position. She lied and said that Gong Jia and Xiao Yichen were her assistants. Gong Jia was still all right. He used a wig to replace his original silver hair. This made it very difficult for people to recognize him. Xiao Yichen, on the other hand, was much more aggrieved. He was not considered short for his age. He was about 1.5 meters tall, which was already considered very tall. However, it was still difficult for him to disguise himself as an adult man. Hence, Alice put on a woman's wig for him. He wore a white lab coat and put on some rouge. He was already very good-looking and had the unique aura of a young man. After a little makeup, he really looked like a young woman. After spending a night on the ship, Alice instructed him to do some things. First, if there were no accidents, Xiao Yichen would have to stay on Ashland Island for a month. She would think of a way to cover for him to leave the island the next month. Gong Jia was a little worried. He was not worried that Xiao Yichen's identity would be exposed. It was just that there would be no one else on the island for a month. Other than the maids, there would not even be a playmate. Given Xiao Yichen's personality, would he be too lonely? Little Yichen, on the other hand, did not mind. Even though he might have to be separated from his parents and sister for a month, he was willing to do it in exchange for Yuyu's return, even if he had to pay a heavier price than this. The ship docked at the harbor. Lisa stood at the harbor to welcome them. However, when she saw Gong Jia and Xiao Yichen behind Alice, her eyes suddenly flashed fiercely. She frowned slightly, obviously sensing that something was amiss. After a moment of surprise, she did not show any suspicion. She only said in a cold tone, "Alice, you're here." In the hurricane headquarters, there was no distinction of seniority. Hence, Lisa had always called Alice by her name. Alice smiled at her. "Is he awake?" "Yes, he's awake." "He's reading in the study," Lisa said. Her tone was calm and emotionless, like an emotionless machine. Xiao Yichen could not help but look at her again. Chapter 3574. However, Xiao Yichen could only lament and didn't reveal his emotions. He followed closely behind Alice, lowered his head, and quietly walked into the castle. Would he be able to see Yuyu soon? Xiao Yichen suddenly felt extremely excited. When he thought of this, he couldn't help but feel uneasy. He didn't know how Yuyu had changed after not seeing Yuyu for more than a year. Had he grown taller? Was he still as skinny as before? Would he recognize him when they met? Xiao Yichen clenched his fists tightly, only to feel his palms full of cold sweat. The castle was huge. As Lisa led them all the way, Xiao Yichen only felt that there were endless stairs and endless corridors. Finally, after walking for a very long time, Lisa stopped in front of a door and said in a deep voice, "Young master is in his room." You can go in directly. Alice pushed open the door and walked in naturally. Gong Jia followed closely behind. Just as Xiao Yichen was about to step in, he inexplicably felt Lisa's gaze on him, as if she was secretly examining him. He followed her gaze and sized her up, only to see that she was coldly sizing him up. That gaze, which seemed to be able to see through his entire body, made Xiao Yichen's heart jolt violently. He had an inexplicable suspicion that Lisa might have recognized him. Lisa quickly turned her gaze away and looked out the window, as if the gaze she gave him just now was just a casual glance. Xiao Yichen didn't take it to heart. He entered the room and locked the door from the inside. Alice walked into the bedroom and saw the back of a young man lying quietly on the big bed. He lay quietly on the bed with his eyes closed, as if he was still asleep. However, Gong Jia and Xiao Yichen, who were standing behind her, couldn't calm down. Especially when he saw the young man's extremely familiar yet pale face, Gong Jia's breathing suddenly became erratic. He walked excitedly to the bed and squatted beside it until he recognized that the child in front of him was really Yu Yu. Yu Yu, who had disappeared without a trace for more than a year, suddenly felt a burning sensation in his chest. It really was Yu Yu. Xiao Yichen was so excited that his entire body trembled. This voice had only appeared in his dreams for more than a year. Now that he finally saw it in real life, he couldn't even tell if this was reality or a dream. Gong Jia couldn't help but reach out and cup Yu Yu's little face. However, the moment he touched his face, the young man on the bed suddenly woke up. He suddenly opened his cold eyes, and his pupils contracted. When he recognized the unfamiliar man in front of him, he sat up in shock and coldly swatted his hand away. There was a loud smack. He swatted Gong Jia's hand away expressionlessly and asked coldly, "Who are you?" Gong Jia was about to step forward when Alice immediately stopped him. She said to Yu Yu, "Young master, these two are the assistants I brought over. He was taking your temperature just now." The young man frowned but didn't say anything. He only glanced at Gong Jia and Xiao Yichen cautiously. Xiao Yichen saw Yu Yu's cold and indifferent gaze land on him. He scrutinized him for a long time before he finally looked away coldly. It was obvious that he didn't pay much attention to him. At the same time, this also meant that Yu Yu had really forgotten about him. Perhaps he didn't feel anything when he was asleep, but when he woke up, Xiao Yichen suddenly realized that Yu Yu had really changed. He had become especially unfamiliar. Chapter 35-75. Alice pretended to be normal as she walked over. As usual, she started a series of tests on him, including measuring his blood pressure and temperature. Yu Yu was very obedient. He allowed her to use all sorts of instruments to measure his body. However, his expression was indifferent, as if it was just a routine. Seeing that he was so calm, Alice couldn't help but ask, "Do you still have palpitations recently?" "Occasionally." He was a man of few words. If he could describe something with one word, he would definitely be stingy. He didn't speak often. Probably, other than him, no one else could live on this isolated island for a few months without breaking down. Humans were social animals. They were used to living in groups and isolated from society. Yu Yu only had Lisa by his side. However, both of them were quiet and didn't speak often. Occasionally, Lisa would deliberately talk to him, but Yu Yu would only use a few words to end the conversation. In the past, Yu Yu was naturally introverted. However, because of Yun Shishir, he was still considered cheerful. However, under hypnosis, the second personality destroyed the first personality. As a result, the second personality completely took over. Today, Yu Yu was more like a walking corpse. Xiao Yichen's heart ached so much that he was about to suffocate. When he thought about how lonely Yu Yu had been for the past year, he felt as if a knife was being twisted in his heart. For some reason, he hated Gong Xiaoying even more. Gong Jia pulled Xiao Yichen behind him and reminded him, "Are you ready? Can you hold on for a month?" Xiao Yichen nodded and said firmly, "Uncle, don't worry. It's only a month. I can still hold on." Gong Jia said coldly, "I'm just afraid that when the time comes, You won't be able to think about mommy and Yueyao until you cry and snot. Xiao Yichen pouted. Can't I think about them even if I can't see them? Alice glanced at them and suddenly took out a medicine box. She took out a syringe, opened a medicine bottle, and sucked the medicine into the syringe. According to the plan, she injected Yu with tranquilizers and sleeping pills in place of the original injection. Then, she disguised him as Xiao Yichen and took him away without anyone knowing. Then, he asked Xiao Yichen to stay behind to replace Yu. There were not many people on the island who were close to Yu, so normally, no one would notice. Even Lisa could not tell the difference between Xiao Yichen and Yu. Alice held Yu's arm. Just as she was about to inject him, Yu caught a glimpse of the medicine bottle and was shocked to see the table of elements on the bottle. He immediately pushed her needle away. The syringe fell to the ground with a loud thud, and a few drops of medicine spilled out. Alice stared in shock. Yu asked coldly, "What medicine is this?" "This is the medicine that I've been injecting you with before." Yu narrowed his eyes and said mockingly, "The table of elements on the medicine bottle is not what it used to be." He was very observant. In the past, whenever Alice injected him with medicine, he would observe the table of elements on the medicine bottle. Now, the medicine that Alice was about to inject was obviously not the same medicine as before. Moreover, she had brought 2 suspicious people with her this time. In an instant, he became even more vigilant. Yu suddenly opened his mouth and was about to ask Lisa to come in when Gong Jie rushed over and covered his mouth tightly. He warned, "Don't make a sound." Chapter 3576. Yu sized him up coldly. He struggled fiercely, trying to break free from Gong Yichen's grip. Gong Jie saw that he was struggling fiercely, so he used his hand like a knife and slashed the back of his neck. Yu's eyelids fluttered, and he fainted on the bed. Alice was dumbfounded. Xiao Yichen was so shocked that he couldn't close his mouth. He ran to the bed and carried Yu. He opened his eyelids and saw that he had really fainted. He was shocked. "Uncle, you're so cruel. You're so cruel to your own nephew." Gong Jie held his forehead and said with a headache, I didn't do it on purpose. I didn't use too much strength. He won't die. He's just fainted. If you used more strength, Yu's neck would have been broken, okay? Xiao Yichen said angrily. Gong Jie was as strong as 3 adults, and he still had the cheek to say that he didn't use too much strength. If he used more strength, he would have killed him. Gong Jie cleared his throat awkwardly and said, "It's good that you hit him. Maybe he'll remember who he is." He looked at Alice for confirmation, but she said coldly, "No matter how much you hit him, he won't regain his memory." Gong Jie's lips twitched. Although his heart ached, there was nothing he could do. "I'm worried that he'll spread the news." "Okay, don't make a fuss." When he was young, he often got injured during training. He didn't suffer any injuries that were more serious than this. Xiao Yichen carefully touched the back of Yu's neck. Seeing that there weren't any injuries or fractures, he was relieved. Yu had fainted. This time, he could finally do whatever he wanted. Little Yichen hugged him tightly as if he had found his lost treasure. His eyes reddened uncontrollably. Xiao Yichen's heart was filled with tenderness when he finally met her after so many times in his dreams. No matter what, he had to bring Yu home. He never belonged to Hurricane. He belonged to the Mu family. He had a father, a mother, a brother, and a sister who loved him. He shouldn't be Gong Fan. He shouldn't be such a cold-blooded, demon-like war machine. Alice walked over and helped Yu lie flat on the bed. She helped him dress up, then took off Yu's clothes for Xiao Yichen to change into, while Xiao Yichen put on Yu's clothes. After more than a year, Yu had also developed a little and grown taller. However, compared to Xiao Yichen, he was still very skinny. The clothes on his body looked very empty. After putting the wig on his head, the job was finally done. Xiao Yichen, on the other hand, disguised himself as Gong Fan and lay on the bed. Based on his appearance alone, no one would be able to tell that he was a fake. Gong Jia frowned and said with disdain, "Can't you act more realistically?" "How?" "Make your expression cold and your gaze fierce." Xiao Yichen immediately put on a straight face. However, Gong Jia was used to seeing his warm smile. Now that he suddenly imitated Yu Yu's expression and put on a cold face, Gong Jia couldn't get used to it. Alice said, "There aren't many people on this island, so you don't have to force yourself. However, you can't give yourself away when you're facing Lisa. She's in charge of taking care of Yu Yu for Gong Shaoying. If you give yourself away, it'll be hard for the news to leak. When that happens, it'll be very difficult." Chapter 3577. Xiao Yichen and Yu Yu had been swapped. The swapped Yu Yu was immediately taken away by Gong Jia. When they left, Gong Jia carried him on his back. Lisa stood at the door and saw Gong Jia carrying Yu Yu. The guy on his shoulder had obviously fainted. She asked symbolically, "What's wrong with him?" "Blood sickness." He had fainted. Lisa didn't probe further with such a careless explanation. She obviously didn't suspect anything either. As an assistant, how could he faint from blood sickness for no reason? That didn't make sense. She let him go easily. Gong Jia couldn't help but feel that something was amiss. He turned around and looked deeply at Alice, only to see her enter the room with a cold expression and close the door. He had a feeling that she knew about this matter. Gong Jia asked Alice, "Have you communicated with Lisa about this?" "No. But I have a feeling that she knows." Gong Jia lowered his voice and said, "I swapped Yu Yu." Alice furrowed her brows and turned around to take a look. However, she didn't have time to think too much about it. "Now's not the time to think about this. Let's get out of here quickly." Gong Jia nodded. After Gong Jia and Alice left with Yu Yu, Lisa entered the room. Xiao Yichen was initially at a loss. When he saw her enter, he frowned and pretended to be asleep on the bed. He wanted to bluff his way out of this. Lisa walked to the bedside and saw Xiao Yichen lying on the bed quietly asleep. She smirked mockingly and kicked him. Xiao Yichen sat up in shock and said angrily, "Why did you kick me? They're gone. You don't have to pretend anymore." "Pretend?" Xiao Yichen's heart skipped a beat, but he refused to admit it. "What do you mean pretend? I don't know what you're talking about." "You can understand." Lisa paused and said, "Mu Yichen." When Xiao Yichen heard this, he abruptly turned his head and stared intently at her. He couldn't believe that Lisa could recognize him so easily. After all, he and Yu Yu looked exactly the same. At first, even Mu Yaja couldn't tell them apart. Only Yun Shishir could recognize them at first glance. How could Lisa tell at a glance that he wasn't Yu Yu? She could even tell that he was pretending to be asleep. What a sharp gaze. Lisa pursed her lips coldly, apparently knowing what he was thinking. She said coldly, "I recognized you the moment you got off the boat." Usually, Alice would only come alone. She was not allowed to bring anyone with her. However, today, two strangers had appeared. Even though Gong Jia and Xiao Yichen were in disguise and no one could recognize them, it didn't mean that she wasn't observant. She used to be Gong Jia's maid, so how could she not recognize him? Xiao Yichen had the same face as Yu Yu, so how could she not recognize him? No matter how he disguised himself, it was difficult to change his facial features. She knew very well that they were here to take Yu Yu away. However, she turned a blind eye and did not stop them. With her ability, she was fully capable of stopping them. However, she didn't. Xiao Yichen's heart skipped a beat. He was so nervous that he broke out in a cold sweat. He was worried that Lisa would ignore Yu Yu if she knew about this. Lisa smiled and said, "Don't worry, I'll just pretend that I don't know about this. From now on, you're Gong Fan. As long as you play your role well and don't let anyone recognize you, I won't make things difficult for you." Chapter 3578. Why did she do that? Her job was to protect Yu Yu, but in reality, she was a spy that Gong Shaoying had placed around him to keep an eye on him. This was her job, but she didn't fulfill it. She even let Yu go on purpose. Why did she do that? There's no reason. Lisa couldn't be bothered to explain further. I'm guessing that Alice will report to Gong Xiaoying that you're unwell. You don't have to go anywhere except here. You just have to stay here quietly. Remember, don't talk too much. After she finished speaking, she turned around and left the room swiftly. Xiao Yichen leaned against the headboard in a daze. For a moment, his mind was in a mess. When Yu woke up, he was in a high-class cabin. He sat up and realized that he was on a huge bed. Just as he sat up, he heard a man's elegant voice beside him. You're finally awake? Before Yu could react, Gong Jia pounced on him. He hugged his head and rubbed his face. Yu, Uncle missed you so much. Yu frowned and instinctively reached out to push him away. So disgusting, so mushy, Yu said coldly, let go of me. However, Gong Jia didn't let go of him. Instead, he cupped his face and planted a kiss on his cheek. Get lost. Yu instinctively pushed his face away and distanced himself from him. Immediately, he reached out and rubbed the spot where Gong Jia had kissed him. His eyes were filled with disgust. Who was this man? He actually kissed him. Yu looked up angrily and glared at Gong Jia. What are you doing? Kissing my biological nephew. Biological nephew? Yu narrowed his eyes dangerously and asked suspiciously, who are you? Gong Jia said pitifully, Yu, don't tell me you don't even recognize your biological uncle? I'm your uncle, Gong Jia. Gong Jia? Yu coldly spat out 3 words, I don't know you. He wiped the spot where Gong Jia had kissed him. Then, he rubbed his hand on the bedsheet forcefully. Gong Jia was traumatized when he saw this. You think I'm dirty, yes. It's dirty, he admitted bluntly in a cold-blooded tone. Gong Jia was speechless. Gong Jia. He really wanted to beat him. In the past, he had never felt that this fellow deserved a beating. Gong Jia inched closer to him and asked angrily, you really don't recognize me? Should I know you? You Gong Jia pursed his lips and comforted him, it's okay if you don't recognize me. Anyway, it's good that you're still alive. Your mommy knows you're still alive. She's waiting for you at home. Mommy, this word actually caused a slight ripple to appear in his ice-cold heart. Even though he quickly regained his deathly stillness, only this word caused him to become slightly absent-minded. In an unfamiliar environment, he was surprisingly calm. He asked, where are you taking me? Although the Gong Jia sitting in front of him had an overbearing aura, Yu's aura was not suppressed at all. Such a thin body seemed to be brewing an extraordinary aura. It was frightening. He had really changed. Chapter 3579. Looking out of the window, Yu saw the sea. He knew that he was now traveling on the sea, which was no different from a cage on the sea. It was difficult for him to escape, and he was destined to be unable to escape from this man's control. Since he was already here, he might as well take things as they came. Yu lay down on the bed quietly and said coldly, you don't have to watch over me. I can't escape anyway. Gong Jia widened his eyes in surprise. He was surprised by his calmness. However, he quickly smiled and stood up. Have a good rest today. You'll go home tomorrow. He left the room after he finished speaking. After the door was closed, Yu closed his eyes and fell asleep. At the same time, in the Mu residence, Yun Shishir was restless. She tossed and turned in bed when she returned to her room. She could not sleep well and felt uneasy. Gong Jia sent her a message saying that he was on his way back with Yu and asked her not to worry. However, she was nervous, agitated, and uneasy. She was worried about Yu, but she was even more worried about Xiao Yichen. Would he be lonely on the island alone? Initially, she did not agree to this plan no matter what. Yu was back, but what about Xiao Yichen? Was he going to replace Yu and stay on the island forever? She heard that there was nothing on the island except for a huge castle. It was almost isolated from the rest of the world. wouldn't Xiao Yichen feel lonely? Yun Shishir's heart ached when she imagined Xiao Yichen being left alone on the island. However, she also felt that it was unfair to Xiao Yichen. She also felt that Mu Yaja was heartless. However, Xiao Yichen said that he was only going to replace Yu temporarily. It did not mean that he would never return. The most important thing now was to bring Yu back and recover his memory as soon as possible. After that, everything would be easier. If Yu continued to stay on the island, nothing would go smoothly in the future. Yun Shishir reluctantly agreed. Before Xiao Yichen left, Yun Shishir hugged him to sleep for the entire night. Xiao Yichen hugged her tightly because he was going to be away for a long time. He did not know when he would be back, so it was inevitable that he would miss her. Xiao Yichen did not dare to stay any longer. And he left hurriedly as he was afraid that it would make her sad. Now that Yu was already on his way back, she felt inexplicably uneasy. 2 days later, the ship docked. Mu Yaja and Yun Shishir were waiting at the port in advance. When Gong Jia carried Yu off the ship, Yun Shishir saw them from afar. She and Mu Yaja went up to them excitedly. Before they even got close, tears rolled down their cheeks. Yu looked at the tall and handsome man in the crowd. Her gaze was fixed on him, but she looked away coldly. However, when his gaze fell on Yun Shishir and he saw her red eyes looking at him with anticipation, he did not know why his heart started to beat erratically. Yu was inexplicably stunned by his strange reaction. Yun Shishir walked up to him and held his face. She looked left and right. When she saw that it was really him, she still could not believe it. She wondered if she was dreaming. It wasn't until she caressed his face that she confirmed that this wasn't a dream. Chapter 3580. Yu frowned and said coldly, "You've got the wrong person." Yun Shishir's expression froze. Mu Yaja also frowned slightly and exchanged glances with Gong Jia. Gong Jia immediately said, "He doesn't remember anything. His memories have been sealed by hypnosis." Yu pursed his lips mockingly and looked away impatiently. To him, the so-called memory loss that Gong Jia mentioned was ridiculous. Memory loss? How could he have lost his memory? Who were these people, and why were they saying such strange things? In fact, it could only prove that Alice's hypnosis was too successful. The fake memories that she had created had already infiltrated Yu's mind. The memories that she had fabricated made Yu really believe that he had grown up in the Gong family and that he was Gong Fan and not Yu. Hence, to him, what Gong Jia had said was a complete lie. He would not fall for it so easily. Yun Shishir was at a loss. The child standing in front of her had the same face as Yu. Whether it was his exquisite eyes or his handsome features, they were all so familiar. In the past year, he had not appeared in her dreams countless times, but he was out of her reach. However, now that the living Yu had really returned, he was so unfamiliar. The Yu who used to pester her and call her "dearest mommy" seemed like he would never return. Yun Shishir's heart was filled with disappointment. She was extremely upset as tears fell one after another onto his shoulders. She was heartbroken. Yu saw her tears and felt annoyed. He turned his face away and did not look at her. To him, whether it was Yun Shishir, Gong Jia, or Mu Yaja, they were all complete strangers. It did not matter. Yun Shishir said with difficulty, "Yu, do you really not recognize me? I've said it before." Yu finally could not take it anymore. He waved her hand away and said coldly, "I've said it before. I'm not Yu. You've got the wrong person. Don't call me that again." These words were undoubtedly heart-wrenching. Yun Shishir's heart ached as if it was being cut by a knife. She clenched her fists and held back her tears. At the side, Mu Yaja held her shoulders tightly and comforted her, "Don't rush. Take it slow." "Okay," Yun Shishir asked carefully. Yu looked at her coldly and did not say anything, as if he was looking at a stranger. However, Yun Shishir did not back away. Instead, she reached out and hugged him. His body was cold. His skin was cold as if he was born like this. His palms were cold, not as warm as Xiao Yichen's. Yun Shishir hugged him tightly. Even though Yu had become so cold when she saw him again, she was already very glad that he was still alive. It was good that he was alive. She had thought that he would never come back. She was already very grateful that her most precious family member had been found after losing him. In the car ride back, Yun Shishir hugged Yu. Even though he was obviously resisting, she refused to let go and hugged him tighter and tighter. His body was so cold. She wanted to use her body temperature to warm him up. However, Yu was extremely uncomfortable. Seeing that he could not break free, he stopped struggling and looked out of the window without looking at her. His cold gaze made her heart palpitate. Chapter 3581. It was the third day since Yu left. Xiao Yichen spent the past 3 days on the island in agony. The nutritious meals, oatmeal, fruits, and all sorts of green vegetables, were all boiled once and tasteless. There was broccoli in every meal, and his eyes were about to turn green from eating. Xiao Yichen felt like he was about to turn into a rabbit. Every time he sat at the dining table, he felt like he was being tortured. He ate the tasteless vegetables and felt like a rabbit who had nothing left to live for, gnawing on the broccoli resentfully. The problem was that there were so many vegetables, but where was the meat? There was no meat at all. It was no wonder that Yu had become so thin after disappearing for more than a year. God, how could he not be thin? According to Alice's explanation, it was necessary to control the intake of protein due to certain drugs. But it couldn't be that there was no protein at all, right? The worst thing was that there was no rice, no rice, no rice. The most tragic thing needed to be emphasized thrice. Xiao Yichen's stomach was as big as a cow's, and he ate at least 2 bowls of rice per meal. However, there were only side dishes and no rice. Finally, after countless nutritious meals were served, Xiao Yichen's body swayed and he was on the verge of collapsing. He was so hungry that he felt dizzy. Finally, with a plop, he fell head first into the plate of rice. Meat, meat, Xiao Yichen had a dream. He felt like he was looking at a huge piece of steak that had arms and legs and was running in front of him. As soon as he saw the meat, his eyes turned red. Drooling, he chased after them madly. Just as he was about to grab the meat, Lisa slapped him and woke him up. When Xiao Yichen woke up, he realized that he was in Lisa's arms. He didn't know when, but his saliva had dripped onto her chest. Lisa's face turned green. She said coldly, "You can talk in your sleep?" Xiao Yichen blinked in shock. He furrowed his brows and asked in confusion, "What did I just say?" Ro? Lisa said strangely, "It's a name." Xiao Yichen pondered for a moment and scratched his head. I dreamt of a piece of meat running in front of me. Lisa's eyes darkened. What? Did his flesh grow legs? Could his dream be any more absurd? Xiao Yichen asked, "Why did I faint?" Lisa said coldly, "Low blood sugar." Low blood sugar. Xiao Yichen sobbed. "I was healthy when I came here, but I've been starved to the point of hypoglycemia." Lisa rolled her eyes. "Who asked you to eat so much?" "I haven't eaten meat in days." On the way here, because they were on the ship, the food was not very good. Originally, they thought that they would be able to eat to their heart's content, but in the end, what greeted them was green food. He was starving to the point of lovesickness. He really wanted to know how Yu had survived the past year. If he doesn't eat meat, won't Yu suffer from hypoglycemia? The medicine that Alice prescribed will help him replenish the effects he needs. It was rare for Lisa to speak so much. She glanced at him in disdain. "Are you awake? Can you get up and walk?" I'm starving to death." Xiao Yichen said pitifully, "I want to eat meat." "Do you eat human meat?" Lisa asked. Xiao Yichen looked at her in disdain. She was so skinny from head to toe. What was there to eat? Chapter 3582. They looked like 2 small steamed buns. Xiao Yichen's face suddenly flushed red. Lisa glanced at him and looked at his expression. She then followed his gaze and it landed on her chest. No matter how stupid she was, she could tell that he was staring at her chest. Lisa's face darkened. Suddenly, she released her grip on Xiao Yichen, causing him to lose his balance and fall to the ground with a loud thud. Pervert. Lisa scolded him coldly. Stepping over him, she went back to her room. Xiao Yichen sat up from the ground and rubbed his butt in pain. Feeling wronged, he said, "What? It hurts." Why wasn't she gentle at all? He saw that she was very respectful and gentle to Yu. It wasn't fair. Xiao Yichen nimbly got up from the ground and chased after Lisa. He muttered behind her, "Why are you so gentle to Yu but so violent to me?" Lisa rolled her eyes expressionlessly and ignored him. "Hey, since I'm replacing Yu now, you should treat me as Yu too. Be gentler." Lisa suddenly stopped in her tracks and turned around calmly. She looked at him meaningfully and said in a mocking tone, "Are you as smart as Yu? Are you as obedient as Yu? Yu isn't as perverted as you." As she said this, she glared coldly at Xiao Yichen and said coldly, "Mu Yichen, I'm warning you. If you stare at me again." Lisa instinctively covered her chest with her hands and said with an ashen face, "Keep your eyes to yourself. If you keep looking, I'll dig your eyes out." After Lisa finished speaking, she walked away. Xiao Yichen watched her leave in shock. He couldn't help but lament, how violent. Even though Xiao Yichen was very resistant to green vegetables, he could only pretend to be calm and silently eat grass in order not to expose his identity. After 4 days, Xiao Yichen finally couldn't take it anymore. He started a hunger strike and insisted on eating meat. Lisa had no choice but to order the chef to prepare steak in the name of wanting to eat meat. At night, little Yichen lay in bed, clutching his growling stomach as he tossed and turned. He was so hungry that he could not fall asleep no matter how hard he tried. The lights suddenly came on. Lisa turned on the lights and walked in with a tray of food. At first, Xiao Yichen was sleepy and was about to fall asleep when he suddenly smelled an alluring aroma. He jumped up from the bed like a carp. He sniffed in the direction of the aroma. Lisa walked to the bed with a tray and said expressionlessly, "Get up and eat." Xiao Yichen moved closer. When he saw the steak on the plate, his eyes lit up. Meat, meat, Xiao Yichen was like a heretic from a cult as he sat upright and devoutly. Lisa picked up the food from the bed and placed the tray in front of him. Like a gust of wind, he devoured the large piece of steak in a matter of minutes. Lisa was dumbfounded. She stared blankly at the knife and fork in his hand, looking as if he still wasn't hungry. She asked eagerly, "Is there more? Are you a pig?" Lisa said angrily, "Even pigs don't eat as much as you." Xiao Yichen said pitifully, "I've been hungry for a few days. This bit of meat isn't even enough to fill the gaps between my teeth." Chapter 3583. Half an hour later, Lisa walked in with another tray. Other than steak, there were cheeseburgers, ham, and sugar eggs. Lisa walked into the kitchen and told the chef, "I'm still hungry. Fry another steak for me." The chef stared at her in shock. It was as though she was a mutated monster. Yu couldn't eat meat, and the nutritious meals were all vegetarian. They couldn't eat any protein or fat, so it would be suspicious if Xiao Yichen wanted to eat meat. Hence, Lisa braced herself and said that she wanted to eat. Alas, her appetite was pitifully small and was not even 1/6 of little Yichen's. Hence, when she mentioned that she wanted to have another serving of steak, the chefs looked at her as if they had seen a ghost. "Last meal. There's no more," Lisa warned. Xiao Yichen nodded like he was pounding garlic. He wolfed down the steak and digested the rest of the food. Only then did he feel a little full. He was so touched that he wanted to cry. Xiao Yichen licked the black pepper sauce on his knife and fork, still craving for more. Lisa sized him up coldly. This guy didn't look like an aristocrat at all. Instead, he looked like a starving refugee. "The way you eat isn't elegant at all. Bad review." Xiao Yichen's lips twitched. He retorted, a full man doesn't know the suffering of a starving man. Try starving yourself. How rare. You didn't even know how to do idioms and basic arithmetic in the past. It's been a while, but you've improved. Xiao Yichen said indignantly, who says I don't know how to do arithmetic? Give me the questions, and I'll show you. Lisa mocked, do you think I'm as childish as you? Humph, I don't think you know how to do arithmetic either. Xiao Yichen sized her up with contempt. Do you know how to multiply 10 by 10? Lisa looked at him with even more contempt. She asked, what's 15 multiplied by 78 and divided by 20? Xiao Yichen was speechless. He was dumbfounded. This arithmetic problem wasn't something that could be solved with just fingers. The problem was that even though his arithmetic skills had improved, he still needed to use what Yu had taught him. He was far from being able to do mental arithmetic. Can you do it? 58, 5, idiot. Xiao Yichen threw himself onto the bed, feeling wronged. Lisa took the tray away and said disdainfully, tell me, why are you and Yu twins? Why is Yu so smart and you so stupid? After saying that, she walked away as light as a feather. Xiao Yichen clenched his fists in anger. He glared at her back and gritted his teeth. How infuriating. He was actually despised. Sleep. Xiao Yichen lay on the bed, hugged the blanket, and closed his eyes angrily. However, Lisa's disdainful gaze kept flashing through his mind, idiot, 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 the demonic voice kept repeating in his ears. Xiao Yichen couldn't take it anymore. He sat up and threw the pillow on the floor. You're the idiot. At the Mu residence. Yun Shishir finished preparing dinner. She walked to the bedroom and gently knocked on the door. Yu, there was no response. Yun Shishir opened the bedroom door and saw Yu sitting on the bed, expressionlessly looking out the window. She said gently, it's time for dinner. Yu didn't move. Even his breathing was so weak that it was almost inaudible. Chapter 35-84. Seeing that he didn't respond, Yun Shishir walked into the room and closed the door slowly. She walked over to him quietly and squatted down in front of him. However, she saw that his eyes were as still as a pool of stagnant water. There was no sign of life. Yun Shishir's heart ached terribly. She couldn't help but lift her hand, wanting to caress his face. However, Yu narrowed his eyes and slapped her hand away in disgust. There was a loud slap. The back of her hand was slapped to the side by him. There should be a limit to your wishful thinking. Yu glanced at her coldly. Wherever his gaze landed, it was as if frost had struck. Yun Shishir could only feel that pair of cold eyes landing on her face. Every inch of her skin was about to be frozen into ice. Every time she saw his cold expression, Yun Shishir's heart felt like it was being stabbed. How did he become like this? Yun Shishir bit her lip hard as tears streamed down her face uncontrollably. Because of his heartless words, her heart was extremely broken. Why are you crying? Yu said in annoyance, you only know how to cry. Even if you want to cry, don't do it in front of me. It's an eyesore. As he said this, he stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. His voice was emotionless as he said, it's time to stop acting. Yun Shishir's heart ached as she said, Yu, I don't know why you've become like this. But, I'm your mommy. Yu closed his eyes. Finally, he turned around impatiently and said coldly, don't call me by that damn name again. Damn it, when Yun Shishir heard this, she felt as if she had been hit hard. It was undoubtedly heart-wrenching. Yu, that was his name. He had said before that no matter what, he would never change his name or his surname. His surname was Yun, and his name was Tianyu. His surname was Yun, and his name was Yu. This was the name his mommy had given him, and he cherished it very much. But now, Yu was coldly saying that it was a damn name. Yun Shishir felt as if a knife was being twisted in her heart. Yaya, outside the door, a childish voice suddenly sounded. Yin Shishir looked up and saw that the door was suddenly opened from the outside. Mu Yaja was standing at the door, holding the pink little Yueyao in his arms. Gong Jie said softly beside him. Yueyao kept calling for her brother. Mu Yaja walked in with Yueyao in his arms. When the little Yueyao saw Yin Shishir, she immediately opened her arms and babbled, asking for a hug. Yin Shishir took Yueyao from Mu Yaja's arms. She gently held her little hand and kissed her forehead. She said to her, "Yes, brother is back." Brother is back. Yueyao followed her gaze and looked at the figure by the bed. Her gaze suddenly froze. Brother. Brother. Her young and tender voice was filled with childishness. It was clear and melodious like a wind chime, tinkling and extremely pleasing to the ear. Yu looked back and saw the little fellow in Yin Shishir's arms. Her skin was as white as snow, and her eyes were big and watery. Her eyelashes were long and curly. Even though she was only 2 years old, her eyebrows were already beginning to take shape. Her facial features were actually somewhat similar to his. He couldn't help but be stunned. Yueyao suddenly stretched out her little hand, raised a finger, and pointed at him. She looked up at Yin Shishir and opened her little mouth. Brother. Brother. Yin Shishir's eyes couldn't help but sting. She immediately said, "Yes, yes, it's brother." It's brother, she still remembered. Chapter 3585. When Yueyao saw Yin Shishir's affirmation, she felt greatly encouraged. She was so excited that she babbled and struggled to get down. Yin Shishir squatted down and placed her on the ground. Yueyao took a step forward and suddenly lost her balance. She fell hard on the ground. However, she didn't seem to feel pain. She clumsily stuck out her butt and got up from the ground. She opened her small hands and walked unsteadily towards Yu. She was wearing the squeaky shoes that Mu Yaja had bought. When she walked, every step she took would make a squeaking sound and shine. In the beginning, Yueyao didn't like to walk. She kept pestering Yin Shishir to carry her. After Yin Shishir was done carrying her, she would let Xiao Yichen carry her, followed by her daddy. When they went out, they would always carry her in their arms. Even when she was old enough to walk, she didn't like to jump around on the ground. She was extremely quiet. Hence, Mu Yaja bought many pairs of such shoes. The little girl found it extremely novel. Every time she took a step, she would squeak. Hence, she started to walk more diligently. Even though she wasn't walking very smoothly, it was considered very smooth. Little Yueyao walked to Yu's side. Seeing that she was about to trip, she hugged Yu's leg tightly and sat on the ground. She hugged Yu like a lazy koala bear. She looked up and smiled foolishly at him. This smile was as if all 3,000 worlds were shining brightly. When she smiled, her 2 front teeth were as cute as a rabbit's. She was mischievous and cute. Yueyao squeaked, "Brother. Brother." She spoke fluently and clearly. Yu understood her immediately. He turned his face away awkwardly and didn't look at her. Seeing that Yu was ignoring her, Yueyao couldn't help but feel aggrieved. She tugged at Yu's trousers with her 2 little hands. She even wanted to climb up Yu's trousers. She really looked like a koala bear. Just as Yin Shishir revealed a gratified smile, she saw Yu take a step back and avoid Yueyao. Yueyao lost her balance and fell to the ground. She sat up and instantly felt unhappy. Her entire little face scrunched up as if she had suffered a great grievance. Brother, she felt so aggrieved that 2 silver beads appeared at the corners of her eyes. She pursed her lips but held it in. When Yin Shishir saw this, she immediately walked over and wanted to carry Yueyao. However, Yueyao pushed her away. Even though she was only 2 years old, she had inherited Mu Yaja's stubbornness and aloofness. She stubbornly refused to be carried by Yin Shishir. She stood up again and staggered towards Yu. Yu widened his eyes in surprise. However, he saw that she had already walked in front of him and was hugging him like a koala bear. Her eyes were full of attachment. Brother, Yueyao held back her tears stubbornly and refused to let go. She wanted him to carry her. Yu Yu remained unmoved, but his eyes were flickering fiercely. He turned his face away and didn't look at her anymore. After a long silence, he said word by word, "I'm not your brother." Yueyao widened her eyes. Obviously, she didn't understand what he said. However, when she saw his resolute expression, she couldn't hold back her aggrieved emotions any longer. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Boo-hoo, Yueyao hugged his leg and cried pitifully. Chapter 3586. You used to like her a lot. You kept hugging her and teaching her how to call you brother. Now that she's learned it, you're ignoring her when she calls you that, Yueyao pouted pitifully. She cried as she said, "Brother is ignoring her. Brother is ignoring her." Yu Yu turned around expressionlessly and said coldly, "I'm not interested in playing house with you. So, get lost." Yu Yu turned around coldly and sat back on the bed like an ice sculpture. Yun Shishir carried Yueyao, sighed, and left. The door closed softly. Yu Yu looked back slightly and glanced at the door. His eyes were cold, but there was a flash of absent-mindedness in the depths of his eyes. Yueyao's teary eyes appeared in his mind and his thoughts became even more chaotic. He fell on the bed, covered himself with the blanket, and closed his eyes. Outside the door, Mu Yaja and Gong Jia looked at Yun Shishir's disappointed and gloomy face. They looked at each other. Gong Jia said, "Shishir, don't worry. Yu Yu didn't mean what he said. He doesn't remember you, and he doesn't remember Yueyao either. It's understandable that he treats you as an enemy." Mu Yaja agreed with Gong Jia and said comfortingly, "Take it slow." "What if," Yun Shishir said worriedly, "what if he can't remember me for the rest of his life?" "Don't be so pessimistic." Gong Jia said with a headache, "Compared to Yu Yu, I'm more worried about you." He was worried that she would be disappointed, despaired, upset, and unable to recover from this setback. Yun Shishir shook her head and said calmly, "No, I won't. I will become stronger. At this time, Yu Yu needs me more." "Shao Jia, don't worry." She smiled at him. Gong Jia took Yueyao from her arms. Seeing that she was still sulking with tears hanging from the corners of her eyes, he kissed the corner of her eyes and coaxed, "Yueyao, don't cry. Uncle will carry you." "Uncle." Yueyao threw herself into his arms and wrapped her arms around his neck. Gong Jia was overjoyed. It was rare for Yueyao to be so close to him. She took the initiative to wrap her arms around his neck. He couldn't help but kiss her again and again. He couldn't bear to part with her. Mu Yaja said coldly, "If you like it so much, give birth to one yourself." Gong Jia snorted. "No, I love Yueyao the most." As he spoke, he subconsciously shielded her, worried that Mu Yaja would snatch Yueyao from his arms. When Yun Shishir saw these two clowns, her mood finally recovered a little. It was as if sunlight had shone into her heart. It didn't matter. It didn't matter that Yu Yu didn't remember her. She would try her best to make him remember her. It was late at night. Yu Yu lay in bed. Even though he hadn't eaten for a day, he didn't feel hungry. He always carried the medicine that Alice had concocted with him. To a certain extent, these medicines would make him feel full and replenish his various bodily functions. He looked at the ceiling. There was no emotion in his cold eyes. Suddenly, footsteps came from outside the door. Following that, there was a long silence. It seemed that the person hesitated for a long time. Finally, she took the doorknob and pushed the door open. In the darkness, the footsteps slowly walked in. Yu Yu's handsome brows were slightly raised. He closed his eyes but didn't close them tightly. Through the gaps of his eyes, he saw a slender figure slowly walk to his bedside and sit on the edge of the bed quietly. Yu Yu, a fair hand slowly caressed his cheek and tucked his hair behind his ear. Chapter 3587. Yu Yu did not say a word and pretended to be asleep. Yun Shishir looked at him quietly. She could not wait to make up for the yearning she had for him over the past year through this one look. This one look felt like 10,000 years. She could not help but recall how he looked when he was just born. His wrinkled little face was red. After being rescued and returned to the incubator, he looked so weak that it was as if he would leave her at any time. She had just gone through childbirth, but she still insisted on visiting him every hour with Yun Yecheng's help. In the beginning, she was weak, but later on, she slowly regained some vitality. Her two small hands began to wave and grasp the air. Her legs also began to kick. The first time she took him out of the incubator to feed him, he was born prematurely at 8 months. He was so small that he was as light as a feather. She still remembered the first time he opened his eyes. Those jet-black eyes were like inlaid agates, filled with a lively luster. He opened his eyes and smiled at her, revealing his pink gums. The first time he said "Mommy" was inadvertently when she was busy tripping rice noodles for him. The little guy was playing with his toys when he suddenly said, "Mommy." She turned around in surprise and walked up to him. She asked him to say it again, but he only cared about his toys and smiled at her foolishly. He did not say it again. However, Yun Xianxia was still so excited that she could not calm herself down. God knew how long she had been waiting for this sentence. Every time she taught him how to pronounce it, she would exaggeratedly open her mouth and he would be amused by her. Gradually, he grew up and became more mischievous. However, at this time, his body was still weak and he often had to go to the hospital. Thus, throughout the year, the empty ward had become his permanent base. She remembered one time when he was very active and rolled down from the hospital bed. She was so shocked that she rushed over and picked him up. He cried out loud in pain. He rarely cried. Even when he was injected, he was so stubborn that he did not shed a single tear. This fall, however, he cried and hugged her tightly. She coaxed him for a while before he finally stopped crying. He grabbed her clothes and quietly fell asleep. It wasn't until he was 5 years old that his physical condition gradually stabilized. She liked to take him to the park for a walk. Every time she came back at noon, he would obediently prepare lunch and wait for her to come and have lunch together. He didn't know how to cook from the very beginning. At first, when he learned how to cook, the fried rice turned into a black paste. She was so angry that she scolded him and told him not to go into the kitchen without permission. It wasn't because the food he made wasn't delicious, but she was worried that he would cut his hand with a knife at such a young age. What if he accidentally caught fire? She didn't dare imagine what would happen. However, Yu Yu's talent in cooking seemed to be innate. As time passed, the food she cooked became more and more delicious. From Chinese food, to Western food, to Japanese food, to Italian food, it was all very easy for him. She was touched, but her heart ached at the same time. Even if the Yu Yu who knew how to dote on Mommy, the Yu Yu who knew how to do housework, the Yu Yu who knew how to cook, the Yu Yu who knew how to do housework, the Yu Yu who knew how to cook, and the Yu Yu who was very, very capable never came back, it's fine. Chapter 3588. Yun Xianxia hugged his shoulders and her tears fell uncontrollably onto his face. Whether you remember it or not, you'll always be Mommy's Yu Yu. Mommy really misses you, really, really misses you. It's Mommy's fault. Mommy didn't protect you well. No matter how harsh or heartless you are, Mommy won't blame you. But, don't leave Mommy again. Boiling hot tears continuously dripped onto his cheeks and rolled down his cheeks endlessly. She held his face in her hands and gently kissed his forehead. Her tears fell straight onto his eyelashes, slid through his eyes, and trickled down from the corners of his eyes. Yu Yu could only feel his vision becoming blurry. Her tears seemed to flow from her eyes and into his heart. His heart tightened and convulsed inexplicably. He felt as if he was going to suffocate and turn the world upside down. Why was she crying? Don't cry. Her tears made his heart feel like it was going to explode. Why did her tears cause him to lose control of himself? Hearing her sobbing, he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his heart, as if it was going to pierce through his heart. What was going on? What exactly was going on? Yu Yu suddenly felt a sharp pain in his head. His heart was in a mess and he couldn't help but frown. When he came back to his senses, he felt Yun Xianxia's body stiffen. He then realized that his arms had unknowingly wrapped around her shoulders. It was as if he had lost control and hugged her uncontrollably. Yu Yu was so shocked that he pushed her away and sat up on the bed. Although he tried to hide it, he couldn't hide the embarrassment that he was showing at this moment. Xianxia came back to her senses and stared at him in disbelief. Yu Yu's breathing quickened. He stared at her warily and leaned his back against the bed. He said coldly, "Are you done crying?" Xianxia was stunned. His change was so sudden that she was not mentally prepared. When he hugged her just now, she really thought that Yu Yu was back. However, it was just a moment of joy before everything returned to normal. Yu Yu said coldly, "You don't have to show such an expression." He turned his head and looked out the window, deliberately not looking at her lamenting expression. "Yu Yu, do you know why I call you Yu Yu?" Xianxia said, "When you were born prematurely and almost died. I'm glad that God's blessing. You are the best gift to me. That's why I named you Yantianyu." Ha! How interesting. I'll say this one last time, my name is Gong Fan, not Yantianyu. As he said that, his head was suddenly felt. He was in pain. The pain, Yu. She asked worriedly, "What's wrong? Do you have a headache?" She rushed out of the door in a hurry, found the medicine box, and rummaged through it. Finally, she found the painkillers. Carrying a glass of water, she walked into the room and passed it to him. "This is a painkiller. Take it, and your head won't hurt anymore. Enough." Yu had a splitting headache and was extremely irritated. The berserk factor in his body was fermenting. He flung her hand away. "Go away." Chapter 3589. The sudden movement caused the two of them to freeze. Yu stared at the shattered glass on the floor, feeling inexplicably frustrated. Xianxia lowered her head and stared at the shattered glass. For a moment, she couldn't figure out whether it was the glass that had shattered or her heart. Xianxia pursed her lips as tears rolled down her cheeks. Suddenly, she knelt down on one knee and picked up the shattered glass pieces. "Mommy, in the future, let's use the same glass as a family of 4, okay?" She could still remember how Yu had excitedly brought 5 glasses to Yueyao not long after she was born. 3 of the glasses had adorable suns on them while the other 2 had beautiful moons on them. Yu had said that his daddy, Xiao Chen, and he were the suns that protected the moons and gave them warmth. The moons were bright because of the suns. Gong Jie even threw a tantrum at one point, displeased that none of the 5 cups belonged to him. However, Yu had muttered, "You're a married uncle, and you're a spilled bucket of water. It's not yours." He had carefully placed the 5 glasses on the rack and marked them separately. Her tears continued to drip onto the carpet, staining it. She picked up the shattered glass pieces bit by bit until her gaze fell on the suns. Suddenly, her fingertips started to tremble uncontrollably. In a moment of carelessness, she accidentally cut her fingertips. A drop of blood appeared on the wound. However, she didn't feel the pain at all. She held the shattered glass pieces in her hands as her sad tears fell silently. When Yu saw this, especially when he saw Xianxia's tear-stained face, he couldn't help but grip the bedsheets tightly. The bedsheets were crumpled into a ball, just like his inner world at that moment. "Stop picking them up." Little did he know that the moment he finished speaking, Xianxia's tears fell even more violently and she started to sob. Yu frowned again. He felt a headache coming on when he heard her crying. He held his forehead and looked helplessly at Xianxia, who was squatting by the bed and holding back her tears. He didn't know what to do with her. In fact, Yu already knew why Alice came to the island. Yu also recognized Gong Jie and me. The sea breeze on the island blew gently. Xiao Chen put on a jacket and sat on the beach. The bright moon seemed to be half submerged in the sea, but it also seemed to be rising from the sea. It was a beautiful sight. Lisa stood beside him and looked at the moon that seemed to be immersed in the sea. It was as if the sea water was the tears of the moon that had gathered to form the sea. She didn't say anything. She sat down beside Xiao Chen and gazed at the distant horizon. Her lips twitched as she said, "I work for young Master Jie. How could I not recognize him?" Xiao Chen turned to look at her in surprise. So, you did it on purpose? On purpose? Lisa smiled. What do you mean on purpose? You knew that Yu and I were swapped, but you still allowed Gong Jie to take Yu away. Lisa didn't say anything, but it was a silent admission. Why? Xiao Yichen didn't understand. Isn't your mission and duty to take care of Yu? If he was taken away, it means that you didn't fulfill your duty. Aren't you worried that Gong Xiaoying will hold you accountable? Lisa didn't answer. Instead, she asked, do you know what faith is? Chapter 3590. What do you believe in? Xiao Yichen asked. Lisa looked at the moon and narrowed her eyes. She said mockingly, belief? I don't have any. Ever since she could remember, her family had been destroyed and her family had died. She and hundreds of other war orphans like her had been brought to Atlanta Island. On Atlanta Island, there was a fearsome assassin organization. Every year, they would recruit war orphans or refugees of different skin colors, ages, and genders from all over the world. Hundreds of children were locked up in a huge cage. They were only given a bowl of rice and a glass of water. Hundreds of children were only given a bowl of rice and a glass of water. Every child was hungry. What did this mean? This meant that even if they wanted to eat a mouthful of rice, they would have to face hundreds of children fighting each other. If they were hungry, they would only be given a bowl of rice. If they were thirsty, they would have a glass of water. In order to fill their stomachs and survive, the children would start to fight each other. Some were born weak and unwilling to fight. In the end, they could only starve to death. Most of the children would fight with their lives. Everyone wanted to live. No one was an exception. She was the same. At that time, her belief was that she did not want to go hungry. In the beginning, she was unable to recover from the setback. She was weak and could not compete with the children who formed cliques. However, hunger was like a beast. Once hungry, the primitive hunting instinct in her body would be fully activated. She started to fight and snatch. Gradually, from a mouthful of water to a mouthful of rice, until she could snatch half a bowl of rice and half a glass of water. Gradually, many children starved to death. Corpses were constantly being dragged away from the cage. However, the other children did not dare to leave the cage. They were like livestock in captivity. Later, a bowl of rice became half a bowl of rice, and a glass of water became half a glass of water. Eventually, they stopped eating and drinking. At that time, many children had already gone crazy. They were all brought from war-torn lands. Some were even natives. They did not have the concept of law and did not have the principle of killing or not killing. They only wanted to live. When they were hungry and uncomfortable, they wanted to eat. When there was no food, even if they gnawed the flesh of a living person, they would still devour it. Children who were unwilling to eat became living prey. At this time, it was necessary to resist those children who formed cliques. In the end, Lisa and the other children survived, but at that time, all the children were on the verge of death. She was not surprised. The moment she crawled out of the rope, she naively thought, was she finally free? The belief then was to live in this warm sunshine. However, after the children were brought out, they were immediately sent to the next round of devil training. The so-called devil training was hellish. The weak would die, and the strong would survive. Perhaps, in the end, there would only be one person who could survive all the trials. Lisa was the only child who survived during that period. However, after the cruel competition, she didn't even have a basic belief. It was precisely because he had no faith that his heart ached for Yu. After the first personality was destroyed by the second personality, it became Gong Fan's Yu. It was like a numb and cruel zombie. It had no feelings, no beliefs, and no goals. Empty ambition. Chapter 3591. When she had first met Yu, this child was so special. On one hand, he was ruthless and unscrupulous. On the other hand, he was as warm as ever, just like the bright and beautiful sun shining on one's heart. However, this warmth was only vividly displayed in front of Yunshushi. At that time, Yu was loved, knew how to love and enjoy being loved. He was blissful. Now, Yu was sitting there, but he was as empty as a painting. He was still as if there was no trace of life in him. She knew very well that Yu was not happy at all. Therefore, she had deliberately let Yu go. At least, when Yu was brought back to the Mu family, there would be people who would love and protect him. They would not bear to use him. Now, her belief was that her little master would be able to smile from the bottom of his heart like he did in the past. Xiao Yichen took a deep look at Lisa. It was as if something in his heart had been deeply touched. Yunshushi hugged the broken shards. Her tears kept falling onto the carpet and her lips were trembling. She did not even notice that the shards had cut her palms and blood was seeping out. Yu casually switched on the wall lamp and saw the tears on her face clearly. At that moment, he did not know what to do. In the past, he had never felt so helpless. Now that he was faced with such a sad woman, it was as if there was an invisible hand mercilessly tearing his heart into pieces. He suddenly blurted out, "All right. Don't cry." However, Yunshushi was unmoved. When she thought of the 5 cups that Yu had bought and one of them was missing, she was so sad that tears kept falling. "Don't cry." Yu threw the table lamp on the floor in frustration. He did not know how to stop her tears, let alone how to comfort her. He only knew that when he saw her tears, his heart would also hurt. When he saw her sad, he would also feel very sad. Yunshushi looked up and saw Yu's impatient expression. She then stood up and left with the shards in her arms. Not long after, she came back in again. Wearing gloves and a vacuum cleaner, she cleaned up all the shards on the carpet. You should sleep early." After Yunshushi finished speaking, she awkwardly wiped her tears and left the room. Yu looked in the direction of the closed door. She could not help but feel a little dazed. He lay down on the bed, but he could no longer fall asleep. He opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling. No matter what, it was difficult for him to fall asleep. He suddenly sat up and got off the bed. He opened the door and walked to the living room. This was the first time he walked out of his room since he returned to the Mu family. On the table in the living room, there were a few pieces of paper towels. On the paper towels, there were a few pieces that formed a sun. Yunshushi couldn't bear to throw it away, so she pieced the pieces together. Yu glanced at it and his heart seemed to be in turmoil. He turned around and looked around. Suddenly, he saw a few white blankets on the cupboard beside the table. He frowned and walked over as if he was possessed by gods and demons. Yu took the quilts and walked into the room. He sat in front of the study table and casually opened the drawer. There were a few boxes of paints in the drawer. He squeezed the paints into the palette, picked up a pen and dipped it in the paints. Then, he slowly drew a circle on the surface of the empty cup. Yu suddenly realized that he was doing something childish. He frowned and put the cup on the table with a look of disgust. He turned around and was about to go to bed. Chapter 3592. In his mind, he couldn't help but recall Yunshushi's misty, teary eyes. His heart was in a mess. Yu looked at the cup on the table and hesitated. Finally, he sat back down. The next day, Yunshushi walked to the room door and knocked gently, but there was no response. She pushed the door open and walked in. She saw Yu wrapped in the blanket on the bed, still sleeping. She walked to the bedside quietly. She was worried that she would wake him up, so her footsteps were light and slow. As she walked past the study table, her gaze was attracted by a cup on the table. Yunshushi followed his gaze. She remembered that this cup was used to serve guests. Why was it placed here? She casually picked up the cup, but from the corner of her eye, she caught a glimpse of the neatly packed paints and brushes, as well as the unwashed color palette. She couldn't help but be startled, and slowly turned the cup over. On the other side, there was an exquisite simple drawing on the white surface of the cup. There was a small sun drawn on the cup. Although the strokes were simple, the drawing was exquisite. It was exactly the same as the sun on the cup that Yu had bought previously. Yin Shirshi's heart skipped a beat. This was drawn by Yu. It was unbelievable. Yin Shirshir looked at the bed. Yu was still sleeping. He was curled up under the blanket and sleeping soundly. Her gaze fell on the cup again. The sun on the cup had been drawn for a long time and the paint had dried up. She felt warmth in her heart, as if the sun was shining on her. This was drawn by Yu. Could it be that he had drawn a new cup because he had accidentally broken the cup yesterday? Yin Shirshir was extremely touched at this thought. She held the cup lovingly. She left the room with the cup in her arms. In the living room, Wuxia was cleaning up the table. When he woke up in the morning, he saw the broken cup on the table. Yin Shirshir pieced the sun together. He knew in his heart that Yu must have upset him again last night. Yin Shirshir had always treated this cup like a treasure. During that period of time, she had always held this cup. This cup had accompanied her through the most torturous period of her life. However, now that it was broken, it was natural for her to be upset. For the entire morning, she was in low spirits and her eyes were swollen. It was obvious that she had cried a lot last night. When Yin Shirshir walked into the living room with a cup drawn by Yu, she raised the cup in front of Wuxia as if she was presenting a treasure. She smiled and said, "Look, this was drawn by Yu." Wuxia couldn't help but be surprised. He took the cup from her hand. Yin Shirshir was still worried as she reminded him, "Be careful. Don't drop it. It won't drop." Wuxia comforted her. His gaze fell on the cup, but he smiled and said, "One look and I can tell that it was drawn by that little thing. Do you think that Yu drew this cup because he saw me sad? So, that's probably it. Although he has lost his memories, there are some feelings in his bones that can't be cut off." Wuxia comforted her and said, "Don't worry and don't be too anxious. Take it slow. His memories will slowly recover." Yin Shirshir was also encouraged. She nodded vigorously as hope ignited in her heart. Initially, she had thought that there was no hope for Yu to recover his memories. Chapter 3593. On the fourth day of Yu's return to the Mu family, he finally started to eat. Yin Shirshir personally cooked a bowl of noodles. She wasn't a good cook, but in the past year or so when Yu wasn't around, she started to study her culinary skills. She started from recipes and attended some culinary training classes. Gradually, she was able to take charge of the kitchen. She brought the bowl of noodles into the room. Yu was sitting on the bed, flipping through the books on the bookshelf. When he saw her walk in, he put the books back into the bookshelf with an indifferent look on his face. Yin Shirshir smiled and placed the bowl of noodles on the table. She said to him, "Yu, eat something. If you don't eat, you'll starve." When Yu heard this, he turned his face away. However, his attitude was no longer as repulsive as before. Instead, he said indifferently, "I don't want to eat. You haven't eaten for 4 days." Yin Shirshir pleaded, "Eat something, okay? Mommy will feed you." She paused for a moment. Worried that he would resist, she changed the way she addressed him. "I'll feed you." Yu sat in front of the study table and looked at her steadily. He didn't reject her, but he didn't agree either. Yin Shirshir walked over to him tentatively. She moved a chair over and sat in front of him. With one hand, she used a fork to roll up the noodles and put it in his mouth. Yu looked at her expressionlessly. Suddenly, he opened his small mouth. Yin Shirshir was overjoyed when she saw this. However, she didn't dare to show her happiness on her face. She suppressed her excitement and fed him. It wasn't until he swallowed the mouthful of noodles that she believed that he was willing to eat. If he was willing to eat, it was a huge breakthrough. She couldn't help but feel touched. She persuaded him again, "Eat another mouthful, okay?" Yu still felt awkward and didn't say anything. He just stared at the noodles in her hand. The noodles she cooked weren't that amazing, but perhaps he was really hungry. He actually felt that this bowl of noodles was very fragrant. Yun Shishir tried to feed him another mouthful of noodles, and he obediently opened his mouth and took another mouthful. When she saw it, she was so moved that she wanted to cry. The fact that he could eat was something she had never thought of. She even thought that if he was still unwilling to eat, she would really be at her wit's end. At that time, she would have no choice but to forcibly inject him with a nutrient solution. Now that he was willing to eat, Yun Shishir was greatly gratified. After what happened last night, the little fellow was no longer so resistant. The little guy finished the bowl full of noodles. Yun Shishir tried to feed him a few mouthfuls of soup, and Yu drank it obediently. As long as she fed him, he would no longer refuse. When Yun Shishir walked out of the room with the empty bowl, Gong Jia came over. When he saw the empty bowl, he was a little suspicious. Is he willing to eat? Yun Shishir nodded agitatedly. Yes. This bowl of noodles was all eaten by him. Oh my God, Gong Jia widened his eyes in disbelief. He's finally willing to eat. It's just that, his attitude towards me is still so cold. When he opened his mouth to eat the noodles, she even suspected that he had finally regained his memory. However, when she took the bowl of noodles and left the room, his back was still facing her coldly. He didn't even look at her once. She then realized that if he had really regained his memory, Yu wouldn't treat her so coldly. Chapter 3594. At night, when Yun Shishir finished cooking the noodles, Gong Jia volunteered to bring it into the room. Yun Shishir was a little hesitant, but Gong Jia said coquettishly, Shishir, let me, as your uncle, perform a little. All right. Gong Jia took the bowl of noodles from her hands. Yun Shishir cautioned him carefully, be careful, it's hot. Hence, Gong Jia carried the bowl of noodles into the room. However, within a few minutes, the sound of porcelain shattering could be heard from the room. Yun Shishir and Wuxia heard the commotion and stood up in shock. They rushed into the room, only to see Gong Jia standing at the side with a stunned expression. Yu was sitting on the bed, and the floor was littered with broken bowls and soup. It was a complete mess. Gong Jia turned his head innocently and glanced at Yun Shishir bitterly. He mouthed, Yu is so fierce. It turned out that when he carried the bowl of noodles into the room, Yu heard the door open and thought that it was Yun Shishir. He sat up on the bed and saw that it was Gong Jia. When he carried the bowl of noodles in front of him and was about to feed him, Yu waved his hand coldly and knocked the bowl of noodles out of his hand onto the floor. After Yun Shishir cleaned up the mess on the floor, the three of them left the room. Gong Jia looked sad and lonely. Why did he knock over your bowl of noodles? Yun Shishir found it unbelievable. What did you say? Gong Jia said sadly, I just brought it in and didn't say anything. But he knocked over my bowl of noodles. As he said this, he crossed his arms and said angrily, that's too much. How could it be? Wuxia said, maybe it's because you're not likable as an uncle. Gong Jia was speechless. He was speechless. He said provocatively, brother-in-law, that means you're very confident. That kid must have knocked over the bowl of noodles that you brought in. Wuxia said confidently, how is that possible? That is my son. Gong Jia said, try it then. I'll give it a try then. Wuxia cooked the noodles and brought them in. Gong Jia stood at the door and started counting down. 5, 4, 3, 2, before he could count to 1, the sound of porcelain being overturned came from the room again. Gong Jia and Yun Shishir walked in and saw Wuxia standing beside the bed with an ashen face. The floor was also in a mess. Yu sat on the bed with an unapproachable posture. His face was as cold as ever. Pucci, Gong Jia covered his mouth and held back his laughter. He had a smug expression on his face that said, I was right, wasn't I? Wuxia glared at him. Gong Jia glared back at him indignantly. Yun Shishir immediately said to Gong Jia, go out first. Sister, go out. Gong Jia left the room feeling wronged. Yun Shishir then said to Wuxia, you go out too. Wuxia looked like he wanted to say something, but he didn't. Instead, he left the room. Yun Shishir cleaned up the mess on the floor, cooked another bowl of noodles, and brought it into the room. In fact, she was feeling a little nervous. In the afternoon, Yu was willing to eat. Perhaps he was really starving. She didn't know if there would be a second time. Yun Shishir carefully inched closer to the bedside. Yu, who was leaning against the headboard, stared at her expressionlessly with a cold look on his face. She probed, "Eat something, okay?" Yu didn't say a word and just looked at her silently. Chapter 3595. The noodles have just been cooked and are still warm. As she said this, she lifted a mouthful of noodles and cautiously brought it to his mouth. Yu's gaze fell on the bowl of noodles and he suddenly raised his hand. Yun Shishir thought that he was going to knock the bowl over and instinctively retracted her hand. However, she saw him suddenly straighten the bowl of noodles. It turned out that her bowl of noodles was tilted to one side and was about to spill out. Yun Shishir's anxious heart then calmed down a little. However, she saw that Yu obediently ate a mouthful of noodles and didn't show any signs of resistance. She was so excited that her hands were trembling. She had never expected that Yu would really accept her. If it weren't for Wuxia and Xianxia, she would have thought that Yu was only eating because he was hungry. However, when Xianxia and Wuxia came in, Yu had knocked over the bowls in their hands. However, when she fed him, he didn't show any signs of resistance. Instead, he obediently ate a mouthful of noodles. Had he accepted her from the bottom of his heart? Yun Shishir was greatly encouraged. Even though he still didn't say anything and still looked cold, he didn't even look at her. However, his willingness to eat what she fed him made Yun Shishir's originally gloomy heart gradually brighten up. Halfway through the noodles, he lowered his head and refused to eat anymore. Yun Shishir persuaded again, Yu, eat another mouthful. If you only eat this little, you'll be hungry at night. Yu looked at her deeply. After a long time, he finally relented and ate another mouthful. When he finished the noodles, Yun Shishir asked him if he wanted some soup. He shook his head. However, she looked very surprised. Wouldn't he choke if he only ate noodles? However, she was already very touched when he finished the noodles, so she didn't ask for more. When she was about to clear the bowl, she asked, "Is it good?" Initially, she thought that he would remain silent like before. However, Yu suddenly opened his mouth and said coldly, "It tastes awful." Yun Shishir was shocked. She picked up the bowl and drank a mouthful of soup. It was so salty that she frowned. So salty. How could he eat it? Yun Shishir felt a little guilty. It took a lot of willpower for him to finish all the noodles that tasted so bad. She could not help but laugh. She looked at Yu and said in embarrassment, "It's so disgusting. It must have been hard on you." Yu looked at her and smiled. She was stunned. When she smiled, she was very beautiful and charming. Especially, it made him feel an inexplicable warmth. It was like the most difficult sunlight in winter. His cold and stiff lips couldn't help but relax a little. However, when Yun Shishir looked at him again, he resumed his cold expression. He looked away and didn't want to look at her again. When Yun Shishir walked out with the bowl of noodles, Wuxia and Xianxia gathered around. When they saw that there was only soup left in the bowl, they were so shocked that they couldn't close their mouths. "He ate it all?" "Yeah." Xianxia immediately said unhappily, "That's not fair. Why did this fellow knock over our bowls when brother-in-law and I brought the noodles in?" Wuxia couldn't hold it in anymore. He glared at him and said, "Shut up." Xianxia said, "That's the truth." Wuxia changed the topic. In any case, it's a good thing that he's willing to eat, no matter who feeds him. Yun Shishir nodded. There were tears in her eyes. She immediately wiped them away with her fingers and smiled. This meant that Yu had started to accept her. This was indeed an amazing breakthrough. Chapter 3596. She felt warm inside. She had accidentally spilled a lot of salt when she was cooking the noodles. Even so, he still finished all the noodles. As she thought of this, she felt both guilty and warm at the same time. Yun Shishir carried the new clothes into the room. Yu Yu was already lying down. When he saw her enter, he turned around and looked at her warily. He slowly sat up on the bed. Yun Shishir smiled and said, "Let me help you bathe, okay?" Yu Yu narrowed his eyes and frowned, but he still didn't say a word. Since he didn't say anything, Yun Shishir took it as a silent agreement. She walked to the bed and reached out to carry him. However, Yu Yu shrunk his shoulders and tried to avoid her. Yun Shishir picked him up at once. They hadn't seen each other for more than a year. He had grown taller and heavier than before. Carrying him was starting to take some effort. Yu Yu instinctively wrapped his arms around her neck and looked angry. "What are you doing?" "I'm carrying you to the bathroom." Yun Shishir pretended to sniff his body and said teasingly, "How many days has it been since you last bathed? Don't you feel that you stink?" Yu Yu's face turned strangely red. Yun Shishir continued, "I remember that you have a serious obsession with cleanliness. You'll go crazy if you don't bathe for a day. Now, you don't care about cleanliness that much?" Yu Yu flew into a rage out of humiliation. He glared at her and said, "Shut up. Let go." Yun Shishir became bolder. She didn't let go of him and carried him to the bathroom. The bathtub was already filled with water. Yun Shishir placed Yu Yu on the floor. She squatted in front of him and reached out to take off his clothes. However, Yu Yu turned his back to her and held his shirt tightly, not allowing her to touch him. Yun Shishir didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Was this guy being shy? Perhaps, after growing up, some men and women began to have different thoughts. In the past, Yu Yu loved it when mommy bathed you. Why are you so shy now? Yun Shishir held back her laughter and turned his body around, only to see that he had a death grip on her collar, preventing her from unbuttoning his shirt. After holding it in for a while, he squeezed out 3 words, "Get out." "What? Are you shy?" Yun Shishir teased, "Which part of your body haven't I seen before?" As she spoke, she began to unbutton his shirt. Yu Yu was so frightened that she took a few steps back until she was forced into a corner. With no way out, she widened her eyes in shock and warned again, "Don't touch me." Her shocked and angry expression was like that of an innocent woman who had been violated. That can't be, right? She used to bathe him too. However, at that time, in order to train him to be independent, she had always let him wash by himself. Yu Yu had even been a little reluctant. Later, when Wuxia bathed him, he had complained that Wuxia wasn't gentle at all and always hurt him. Yun Shishir was amused. Even though Yu Yu had struggled, she still unbuttoned his shirt without a word. Yu Yu couldn't resist at all. He allowed her to take off his clothes and carry him into the bathtub. He curled up in a corner, his whole body submerged in the water, only half of his face above the water. His vigilant eyes were on her, full of resistance. He didn't want her to bathe him. He didn't like to be touched by the opposite sex. Yun Shishir knew that he was shy. As she smiled, she squeezed the shower gel into the shower gel, grabbed one of his arms and started to scrub it carefully. The moment she touched him, Yu Yu's body instantly froze like a rock and he didn't move at all. Chapter 3597. The bathroom was foggy. Gradually, Yu Yu relaxed. His muscles were no longer as tense as before. He allowed Yun Shishir to rub the foam on his body. Her technique was very gentle and light. As the foam rubbed on his body, his muscles and bones relaxed involuntarily. Yun Shishir then applied shampoo on his hair. She was very careful and did not let any of the foam into his eyes. Yu Yu could not help but fall into a daze for a long time because of her gentle technique. After the shower, Yun Shishir carried Yu Yu onto the absorbent mat. Then, she wrapped the large bathrobe around him and wiped his body. Yu Yu remained silent. However, he did not show any strong resistance. He was slowly accepting her. When she thought of this, Yun Shishir's heart was filled with warmth. She firmly believed that his memories would be erased. However, some blood ties could not be erased no matter what. She believed that Yu would definitely recover. Yun Shishir carried Yu into the room. However, she was not in a hurry to leave. Instead, she took out a thick stack of fairy tale books from the bedside table. In the past, Yu loved it when she read him bedtime stories. When he was not around, these fairy tale books were secretly kept by Xiao Yichen. Yun Shishir thought that these books had been thrown away. She was sad for a long time. Then, she went to the bookstore and bought many more fairy tale books. She placed them on the bedside table in Yu's room. Every time a new fairy tale book was released, she would buy all of them. Yu looked at the fairy tale books in her hands strangely. His gaze was filled with doubt. You don't remember? In the past, you loved it when mommy read you fairy tales. Yun Shishir flipped to a page. The first story was Andersen's fairy tale, The Daughter of the Sea. Her fingertips gently ran over the words. For a moment, she was filled with emotions. This was also the first fairy tale that she read for Yu. At that time, Yu was still young. She didn't really understand the story. After she read it a few more times, she finally understood that it was a tragic story. Yu lay down on the bed, and Yun Shishir tucked him in. Daughter of the Sea. Have you heard of it? Yu blinked but did not say anything. Yun Shishir said again, you must not remember. I'll read it again, okay? Yu slowly closed her eyes. Yun Shishir held the book and began to read softly. In the depths of the vast ocean, there is a kingdom of fish. The Sea King had 6 beautiful daughters, especially the youngest, who was even more beautiful than her sisters. She was kind, pure, and had a beautiful voice. They lived freely and without worries in the sea. Sometimes, their grandmother would tell them some novel stories on the sea. This filled the youngest's heart with longing for the world at sea. As Yun Shishir read, memories of the past surfaced in her mind. It was as if she could see a 3-year-old Yu hugging a pillow and sitting on the bed, looking at her longingly. Mommy, do these fish look the same as humans? No, they have the bodies of humans, but the tails of fish. Then how do they breathe in the sea? Yun Shishir was suddenly put in a difficult position. She immediately said, they are the spirits of the sea. They can swim and breathe freely in the sea. Chapter 3598. That's why, once they reach the sea, they can't walk anymore. Are there really mermaids in this world? Yun Shishir pretended to be mysterious. Who knows? I'll continue. The little princess finally reached the age of 15 and was allowed to float to the surface of the sea. She looked around excitedly, wanting to take in everything. At this moment, a large ship sailed by her side. There were many people dressed in gorgeous clothes on the ship celebrating the prince's birthday. The little mermaid was immediately attracted to the handsome prince. At this moment, there was a sudden storm and the waves destroyed the ship. The people fell into the water and sank to the bottom of the sea. The mermaid risked her life and rushed into the whirlpool to save the prince. She gently kissed the prince's forehead and hid in the water, silently waiting for someone to save him. At this moment, a young lady found the prince. She called some people and saved the prince. When the story reached the part where the little mermaid wanted to turn her fishtail into legs, she found a witch and drank a magic potion. However, it was extremely painful to turn into human legs. Every step she took, she had to endure great pain. Yu's heart clenched. He hugged Yun Shishir's arm and said sadly, "Will the little mermaid die?" She smiled. "No, I won't." "That's good." Yu was relieved again. The story continued. The witch told him that if the prince forgot his parents because of love and married the little mermaid, she would obtain an immortal soul. However, if the prince married another lady, the little mermaid would die the morning before the wedding and turn into foam in the sea. The little mermaid's face was pale, but she was not afraid. As a reward, the witch cut off her tongue and took away her beautiful voice. She could no longer speak. Late at night, the little mermaid left her family and left heartbroken. When she came to the sea, she drank the potion but fainted because of the pain. When she woke up, the prince asked her questions. She could not answer because she was mute. However, she endured the pain and danced for the prince. When Yu heard this, he frowned and looked very distressed. As the story went on, Yu stopped talking. Especially when she heard that the prince didn't know that it was the little mermaid who saved her. He wanted to marry the princess and invited the little mermaid to dance for them. On the night before the wedding, the sisters floated to the surface of the sea. It turned out that in order to save their sister, they cut off their hair and gave them a sharp knife. As long as the little mermaid pierced the prince's chest, she could return to the sea. This was his last chance. His memories overlapped with the scene before him. Xianxia looked at Yu, who was lying on the bed. Everything had changed. He lay on the bed with his eyes closed, but no one knew if he was asleep or awake. Xianxia gently stroked his forehead, closed the book, and was about to leave. When she got up, Little Buns suddenly opened his eyes and asked coldly, "Did she kill that prince?" Xianxia was stunned and turned around. Under the moonlight, Yu slowly sat up from the bed. Her cold eyes revealed a hint of curiosity. Did she use that knife to kill that prince? Xianxia shook her head. No. No. Yu said doubtfully, if she didn't kill that prince, she would have turned into foam. Chapter 3599. Xianxia returned to the bedside and caressed his cheek gently. At night, she came to the prince's room and gave him a kiss. As she spoke, she bent down and kissed Yu gently on his forehead. Yu was stunned and his eyes widened in shock. She didn't kill the prince because she didn't have her tail and couldn't return to the sea. At the prince's wedding, she endured the pain and danced. In the end, she turned into foam and disappeared forever. Yu asked, why? Why didn't she kill the prince? This prince is ungrateful. It was the little mermaid who saved him. He seemed to be filled with righteous indignation. When Xianxia heard this, she suddenly laughed. Yu had already immersed himself in this story and his emotions. Just like in the past, when he heard this story, Yu clenched his fists and asked sadly, "If it were me, I would definitely kill the prince and return to the sea to be with my family." Because the little mermaid loves the prince very much. Even if she had to sacrifice herself, she wouldn't be willing to hurt the prince. Yu sneered. If it were me, I wouldn't sacrifice myself for someone who doesn't love me. Xianxia was frightened by his cold gaze. The Yu of the past would not have such a cold gaze when he heard this story. This was a pair of eyes that were filled with hostility. There was a murderous aura that the Yu of the past would not have. Xianxia hugged him tightly, feeling uneasy. Yu, don't be like this. Yu was hugged by her warm embrace. For a moment, his heart calmed down. Not everything can be solved by killing. Xianxia said again, "You weren't like this in the past." Yu suddenly pushed her away and said expressionlessly, "In this world, the weak are prey to the strong. Only by becoming strong enough can one's own interests not be infringed upon." Xianxia was stunned. She suddenly remembered what Yu had said to her in the past. Only by becoming stronger can you protect the people you want to protect. Mommy, I want to protect you, so I must become strong. That way, no one can hurt you. Yu, why do you want to become stronger now? Yu could not help but stare blankly. This question stumped him. That was right, what was he doing now? What was the purpose of him becoming so powerful? Yu's gaze suddenly fell on her hand. In the past, Yu wanted to become stronger because he wanted to protect Xianxia. But now, he had lost his goal and didn't know where to go. He said in a daze, only by being strong can one not be reduced to being dominated by others. Yes. In this world, the weak were prey to the strong. She didn't deny that. To become strong, one had to be built on the pain of the weak. She also couldn't deny that. However, if the strong became apathetic, cold, and heartless, then what was the meaning of life for such a strong person? I'm tired. Yu turned away and did not look at her. I want to sleep. Xianxia furrowed her brows and did not say anything more until he lay down. She covered him with the blanket and left quietly. However, lying on the bed, Yu tossed and turned, unable to fall asleep. When he said that he was tired and wanted to sleep, it was just an excuse. Chapter 3600. It was a mess for no reason. Her embrace was very warm and made him yearn for it. He actually couldn't help but want to hug her back tightly. It was just that this warmth made him feel at a loss, lost and confused. Why did he rely on this warmth? She kept telling him how he used to be and how he used to be. But was there really a past? Yu suddenly felt a splitting headache. It was so painful, as if a pair of hands were tearing his head apart. Yu clutched his head in pain and his body curled up involuntarily. He was drenched in cold sweat. It was only at dawn that his headache eased a little. He wrapped himself in the blanket tiredly and fell asleep. When he woke up, it was already the afternoon of the next day. He slowly pushed open the door and saw Xianxia sitting on the sofa in the living room. She was humming softly as she knitted a small glove. On the floor, Yueyao was sitting on the blanket, hugging a teething stick and chewing on it. When she heard footsteps coming out of the room, Yueyao looked up. She was the first to notice Yu. Seeing him standing at the door, she immediately got up from the floor with her butt sticking out. She gripped the teething stick tightly and walked towards him step by step. "Brother," she hobbled over to him. She loosened her grip and the teething stick fell to the floor. Xianxia heard the sound of something falling. She looked up and looked at Yu. She put the glove aside and said, "Yu, you're awake." Yu didn't say a word. He only lowered his head and looked at Yueyao. Yueyao had a pair of big eyes just like him. They were very attractive. Especially those curly eyelashes. When she blinked, they fluttered like the wings of a butterfly and were very charming. Yueyao suddenly opened her arms. Her cherry lips opened and closed and she said in a soft and tender voice, "Brother, hug." This glutinous rice ball wanted brother to hug her. The little fellow was very forgetful. She had completely forgotten about Yu's indifference towards her when she was asking for a hug. Xianxia froze for a moment and looked nervously at Yu. However, she saw that his attitude was no longer as cold as before. At least, when Yueyao walked towards him, he no longer dodged. "Big brother. Hug me." Yueyao stretched out her arms again and stood on her tiptoes. However, she lost her balance and fell on her butt. From start to finish, Yu looked at her coldly and did not help her up. Yueyao fell, but she did not cry in a delicate manner. She only furrowed her delicate brows, clearly aggrieved. She got up from the ground on all fours and raised her head to look at Yu, only to see that he was still cold and indifferent. For a moment, she was extremely sad. Her little mouth pouted high, and she looked like a storm was coming. Xianxia knew from this that she was going to cry. She quickly stood up and was about to walk over to carry Yueyao when Yu suddenly bent down and gently carried Yueyao. He was still a little unfamiliar with the way he carried his sister. He didn't even know how to use his arms to support her, but Yueyao was delighted to see him carry her. She hugged him tightly like a koala bear and didn't want to let go. She leaned on his shoulder affectionately and broke into a smile. Chapter 3601. For some reason, Yueyao was inexplicably close to Yu. This surprised Xianxia a little. After all, a child's memory was limited. Even before this, Yu was the closest to her and doted on her the most. She liked to hug her every day, hold her phone, and take pictures of Yueyao nonstop like an idiot. However, at that time, Yueyao was incomparably cold to Yu. However, Yu had left for more than a year. Yueyao shouldn't have remembered. Yueyao hugged Yu like a koala. Her little head rested on Yu's shoulder, looking extremely satisfied. Xianxia teased her and said, "Yueyao, where's Xiao Yichen?" She thought that Yueyao had mistaken Yu for Xiao Yichen. When Yueyao finally started babbling, Xiao Yichen taught her to say her name. Yueyao also learned a skill, which was to recognize the names of all the family members, except for Yu. When Xianxia asked, "Where's Xiao Yichen?" Yueyao would often point at Xiao Yichen and ask, "Where's Muyaja?" She could also recognize the direction and point at Muyaja. Yun Shishir didn't specially teach her Yu Yu's name. This name had become an unspeakable pain in her heart. Whether it was Muyaja or Gongjia, they would avoid it as much as possible. Hence, Yueyao didn't know Yu Yu's name. However, Yu Yu and Xiao Yichen looked very similar, so they might have been confused. "Where's Xiao Yichen?" When Yueyao heard Yun Shishir say Xiao Yichen's name, he couldn't help but look around. However, he didn't see Xiao Yichen, so he asked hesitantly, "Where's Xiao Yichen?" Yun Shishir was stunned. If Yueyao mistook Yu Yu for Xiao Yichen, she would definitely point at Yu Yu. However, it did not. Yun Shishir would never have thought that after more than a year, Yueyao actually remembered Yu Yu's appearance and could even differentiate Yu Yu from Xiao Yichen. When Yu Yu heard Yun Shishir's question, he asked suspiciously, "Who's Xiao Yichen?" Yun Shishir said gently, "Xiao Yichen is your older brother. You're twins and look exactly the same. No one can tell the difference. Other than your family members, I didn't expect Yueyao to be able to differentiate between you and Xiao Yichen." After a pause, Yun Shishir said sadly, "After all, when Yueyao was not even a year old, you got into trouble." When Yu Yu heard this, his thoughts were a little confused. "I have an older brother?" Yu Yu looked a little surprised. Yun Shishir immediately took out a photo. It was a family photo and she showed it to Yu Yu. Yu Yu looked at the photo. It was a family photo. Yun Shishir was sitting with Yueyao in her arms. Two children who looked exactly like him were standing on both sides. It was sunset. Of the two children, one had a gentle smile while the other had a sunny smile. Their eyebrows and eyes were exactly the same, except for a slight difference in height. Even he could not tell which child was his own. This was the first time he saw a family photo like this after he returned to the Mu family. At first glance, it was a huge shock. Yun Shishir had always said that he was her son and her baby. Yu Yu had always been suspicious. The reason why he was not so resistant and close to her now was not because he believed that he was her son. It was because he did not know why he was not so resistant and close to her. However, when he saw this photo, Yu Yu could not help but wonder if what she said was true. Was he really her family? Was that possible? Chapter 3602. Alice had instilled memories in him. He was the son of the Gong family and had always been in poor health, so he had been receiving physiotherapy on Ashland Island. He didn't know who his mother was, nor did he know who his siblings were. He only knew that he had an uncle called Gong Jia. However, even Gong Jia told him that his real name was not Muyaja. His real name was Yun Tianyu, and he was the son of Muyaja and Yun Shishir. He could not digest this information for a while. It was complete nonsense. He had been in the Gong family all this time and did not have any memories of Muyaja, Yun Shishir, and even Xiao Yichen. It was just that the photo made his thoughts chaotic for a moment. Yu Yu lowered his head to look at Yueyao, who was in his arms. Yueyao also looked up at him. Seeing him staring at him, the little guy reached out his soft hands and gently patted his face. It was so fun. Yu Yu did not find it annoying, though. Her scratches did not hurt much, and her nails were neatly trimmed. Hence, when she pinched herself, it did not hurt or itch. Yu Yu was no longer as resistant to this child as before. He avoided her as if she were a snake or a scorpion. This change made Yun Shishir feel relieved. Did he quickly improve on the day he regained his memories? During dinner, Yun Shishir personally cooked. When Gong Jia and Muyaja returned, the dishes were already on the table. What surprised them was not that Yun Shishir cooked for the first time, but that they saw Yu Yu sitting at the dining table with Yueyao sitting on the baby stool and playing with a toy. He lazily propped his chin on his hand and quietly watched her play with the toy. This guy actually walked out of his room? This was a miracle. After returning to the Mu family for such a long time, he had always locked himself in his room. He never came out of his room, never letting the sun out. Why did he come out now? Gong Jia and Muyaja looked at each other but did not show too much of a shock, lest they startled him. As usual, they sat down at the dining table. Yu Yu did not look at them and continued to stare at Yue. Gong Jia had his own thoughts. Yu Yu, this damn siscon. Why was he always staring at Yue? Was uncle not good looking? Huh. After being back for so many days, this brat had only glanced at him lightly when he smashed the bowl of noodles that he had brought out. He had not even looked at him directly. Gong's heart. Wuxia and Gong Jia stared at Yu Yu fiercely and complained in their hearts. The two of them were not as good-looking as Yue, right? Yun Shishir walked out with rice and saw that Gong Jia and Wuxia had returned. The two of them sat opposite Yu Yu and the three of them formed a strange triangle. Her lips twitched as she placed the rice on the table. Let's eat. Yun Shishir placed the rice noodles in front of Yue and tied a napkin around her before sitting down beside her. They started eating. Yu Yu was stunned and did not move his chopsticks. When they were on Ashland Island, he had always eaten alone. He was used to having a quiet dining table and had never experienced this before. There were so many people sitting around the table and eating, but he did not feel uncomfortable at all. What are you waiting for? Yun Shishir picked up a grilled chicken wing for him and said, eat it while it's hot. Yu Yu picked up his chopsticks and started eating. Chapter 3603. Yu Yu finally raised his eyes to look at him. It was just that this glance was cold and emotionless, and then, he pushed the vegetables away in disgust. He pushed them away. He had thought that he would just push them away, but unexpectedly, Yu Yu picked up the vegetables and threw them into the small plate used for throwing the bones. Gong Jia's heart shattered with a smack. Wuxia muttered, Yu Yu doesn't like vegetables. Hence, he also picked up a drumstick and put it in his bowl. Yu Yu didn't even look at it. He used his chopsticks and placed the drumstick on the table. Then, he used his chopsticks to pick up the chicken wing that Yun Shishir had given him and started eating. Wuxia was speechless. Gong Jia tried to hold back his laughter until his stomach hurt. He lowered his voice and said, brother-in-law, he doesn't want to eat the drumstick you gave him. Yu Yu just doesn't like you, haha. Wuxia turned around and smiled at him elegantly. Then, he picked up a piece of red braised pork and stuffed it into his mouth. Shut up and eat. Gong Jia couldn't speak with a piece of red braised pork stuffed into his mouth. He stared blankly at Wuxia as he calmly picked up his bowl and started eating. Yu Yu finished the drumstick in his bowl and stopped eating. Yun Shishir saw this and picked up some vegetables for him. Yu Yu hesitated for a while and ate the vegetables as well. Yue thought that it was fun. She suddenly scooped up some rice noodles with a spoon. She raised her little hand and stretched it in front of Yu Yu, wanting to feed him. Yue wasn't very good at using the spoon. She held the spoon in a reverse grip and the rice noodles dripped onto the table. Yu Yu looked at her in surprise, only to hear Yue mumble, okay. Eat. Duh. Yun Shishir said, Yue is feeding you. Yu Yu was stunned for a few seconds. She stretched out her head and took the rice noodles that Yue handed her. The sticky rice noodles didn't have any extra seasoning. It was light, but there was a rich milky fragrance. Yu Yu took a bite. When Yue saw this, he was extremely excited. He danced around and scooped up another bite. His little hand held the spoon with great effort and raised it to his mouth. Yu Yu was a little conflicted. This rice noodle was not particularly delicious. It was a formula for babies, so it was tasteless. However, Yue insisted on feeding him. He didn't know if it was because he found it fun or something else. Yu Yu had no choice but to take another bite. Yue turned his head and smiled at Yun Shishir as if he was presenting a treasure. He revealed his cute little front teeth and said, Mommy. Brother is eating. Yun Shishir smiled and coaxed, okay. Yue, eat too. No, I want to feed. Brother, as Yue spoke, she fed Yu Yu mouthful by mouthful. After that, Yu Yu was full just by eating the rice noodles. Yun Shishir was holding back her laughter. She was a little surprised that Yu Yu didn't show any resistance to Yue's closeness. Even when Yueyao fed him, Yu didn't reject it. Opposite them, the two men who had been ignored from the start to the end were frowning. Gong Jie didn't believe it and picked up another wing root. Yu didn't even look at it and removed it. There was nothing to say. Gong Jie couldn't take it anymore and protested. What's the difference between the wing root I picked up and the one your mommy picked up? This was the love of an uncle. Yu said coldly, it's dirty. There's saliva. It's not hygienic. Gong Jie was puzzled. Didn't Yunshusher's chopsticks have saliva on them? Yueyao's spoon was full of saliva. Why didn't he dislike it? Chapter 3604. After dinner, Yu was about to go back to his room when Gong Jie suddenly put his arm around his shoulder and said, What are you doing in your room every day? Cultivating? Yu slapped his hand away and glared at him as if to warn him, Don't touch me. Why are you glaring at me? Gong Jie said confidently, I'm doing this for your own good. If you weren't my biological nephew, I wouldn't have anything to do with you lying in your room until your limbs degenerate. Yunshusher added, That's right, Yu. You can't stay in your room every day. You have to go out for a walk once in a while. When Wuxia heard this, he suddenly said to Yunshusher, Why don't we take him out for a walk? Who knows, it might be good for him to recover his memory. Yunshusher felt that this made sense. Gong Jie also said, I heard that there's an open-air music festival at Manha Square tonight. It starts at 8 p.m. Why don't we go to the music festival? Yunshusher agreed readily. Gong Jie was about to carry Yueyao when Yunshusher immediately said, Yueyao can't go. It's too noisy at an open-air music festival. Yueyao will cry. Then, what about Yueyao? Although there was a nanny, Yueyao couldn't be left alone. No one was assured. Wuxia said matter-of-factly, as his uncle, you should stay and take care of Yueyao. When Gong Jie heard this, he couldn't take it anymore. No way. Why should I? He hooked his arm around Wuxia's shoulder and said disdainfully, Don't think I don't know what you're thinking. You must be thinking of using the music festival to communicate with Yu. No way, I want to go too. What's wrong with the three of us communicating? Hey, are you being xenophobic? Gong Jie was not convinced and said, I also want to communicate with my nephew. Wuxia said coldly, Your surname is Gong, not Mu. You and I are not family. Gong Jie, Yunshusher added, Shao Jie, you can stay at home and take care of Yueyao. Wuxia continued, Well, you don't like Yueyao very much. Now, no one is fighting with you for a hug. Be good. After that, Wuxia picked up Yu and left with Yunshusher. Gong Jie was left standing alone in the living room, unable to express his bitterness. He didn't know if he should curse her or not. Was he being treated as a babysitter? Just as Gong Jie was about to explode, Yueyao suddenly walked to his side, squatted down, and secretly stuffed a toy into his trousers. Ha ha ha. Yueyao let out a string of bell-like laughter. She grabbed his trousers and tugged. Gong Jie lowered his head and saw that she was having fun playing with his trousers. His eyes couldn't help but soften. He immediately squatted down and pulled her into his arms. Yueyao, Uncle will accompany you at home, okay? Yueyao suddenly raised her chubby little paw and slapped his face. Gong Jie's face darkened. He grabbed her little paw and said, You're not allowed to hit Uncle's face. Yueyao slapped his face again. Gong Jie frowned unhappily. However, when he saw Yueyao's heartless smile, which made him want to dote on her, he suddenly gave in. He curved his lips and gently kissed her cheek. Yueyao, be good. Daddy and Mommy don't want you, but Uncle wants you. Yueyao suddenly pinched his cheek and pulled it until it was deformed. She was amused by his distorted handsome face and couldn't stop laughing. It was only half an hour's drive from Manha Square. Chapter 3605. Yu let her hug him obediently. He looked out of the window. The passing scenery seemed familiar. Was this the place where he used to live? Especially when they passed by the park and the bridge across the river. Yun Shishir saw that he was staring at the bridge and immediately said, Yu, do you still remember? We used to set off fireworks here during the Lunar New Year. Fireworks? Yeah. Yun Shishir continued, at that time, you were fighting to set off fireworks. I didn't let you do it in the past, so you felt that it was a novelty and wanted to light your own fireworks. I was a little scared. Yu stared at the bridge curiously. Through the window, he could see many people standing under the bridge, sitting on long benches or flying kites. The kites were luminous and many of them were bobbing in the wind. He couldn't help but be entranced by the sight. Wuxia steered the kite as he looked at Yu through the rearview mirror. His heart was filled with emotions. Yu had disappeared for a year and everyone was thinking about him. Although no one gave up easily, as time passed, the hope in their hearts gradually disappeared without a trace. However, no one dared to give up. Because if they gave up, it would mean that in their hearts, Yu was really dead. At that time, the search became their motivation to persevere. When Yu really came back, Wuxia didn't show it on his face, but in fact, he was ecstatic. His son was still alive. He had come back alive. However, as a father, he had to maintain his composure. Hence, he didn't show it on his face. However, his care and patience for Yu was no less than Yun Shishir's. Even if Yu didn't acknowledge him and didn't remember him, it didn't matter. Yu would always be Wuxia's son. This was a fact that even the heavens couldn't change. Many people gathered in Manha Square. The weather was perfect for the open-air music festival. There was no rain. Everyone gathered in the square. At a glance, the square was filled with people. Among the crowd, there were people constantly waving their light sticks, forming a sea of stars. There were too many people, probably in the tens of thousands. With so many people, it was too dangerous. If there was any commotion, a stampede could easily occur. Yun Shishir was a little worried. She had always had a lot of concerns. After all, women were more meticulous. Moreover, there were many reports on the news that said that in crowded places, if it wasn't a stampede, it was a crush, or it was a fall and bruise. With so many people around, it was inevitable. Therefore, she hugged Yu even tighter. Why are there so many people? Yun Shishir muttered and looked around. They had arrived relatively early, but because they arrived early, the crowd had blocked the only exit. For a moment, they could not advance or retreat. People kept pushing and shoving, trying to get to the front, the closest place to the stage. There were too many people. If she had known that there would be so many people, Yun Shishir wouldn't have come. However, since she was already here, she might as well make the best of it. Yun Shishir hugged Yu. Even so, it was still difficult for Yu to see the stage. However, he wasn't interested. He didn't like places with too many people, and he didn't like places that were too noisy. It was irritating. It was tiring. Chapter 3606. Yun Shishir, however, said, No, it's too dangerous. There are so many people squeezing around. If you accidentally fall, you might hit your head. Wuxia felt that it made sense. Hence, he took Yu from Yun Shishir's arms, worried that she would be too tired to carry him. Yu was initially a little resistant in his arms and struggled a little. Wuxia said to him, You're so heavy. Mommy's arms will get tired if I carry you all the time. Let Daddy carry you for a while, okay? When Yu heard this, he didn't show any signs of resistance. He just turned his face away and refused to look at him. Obviously, he didn't appreciate it. However, he didn't refuse or resist again. Wuxia was already satisfied. On the stage, the band went on stage one after another to perform the songs. The atmosphere was instantly ignited. Everyone waved the light sticks in their hands and immersed themselves in the moving music. Yu was tone-deaf and wasn't particularly interested in music. However, when the third song started playing, it was an English song that strangely captured his attention. Imanharakani Bodasi Mayam here. Can anyone see Mekanini body help? Can anyone help me? Imanhiri a prisoner of the story I am here. a sinner of history, Cantioheremical. Can you hear me yelling? Arayuing to Jetmana, will you take me away immediately? I've been waiting for you. Yudo rescue you must come and save me. Imanhiran calling out Buddhyakanthar, I am here. I'm shouting loudly, but no one can hear me. Can anybody help? Can anyone help me? I'm hysterical until I break down. I'm lost in the cage. Tell me there's still hope. Is there anyone outside listening? This was an English song. The meaning of the lyrics was about a lost person, trapped in the sad memories of the past, waiting to be redeemed and saved. However, this song actually made Yu feel an indescribable sadness in his heart. He gently closed his eyes. In the darkness, he could vaguely see a cage in the darkness where there was no light. A child who looked exactly like him was holding on to the cage tightly and shouting something. But he couldn't hear anything. He couldn't hear anything at all. In his ears, there was only the sound of music and the noise of people buzzing. The youth in the cage seemed to have seen him. He shook the iron bars and shouted crazily, "Let me out of here." Yu furrowed his brows and was a little puzzled. Who are you? Let me out. I don't want to be here. The youth gripped the iron bars tightly and looked desperate. I don't want to be here alone, don't lock me up here alone. Between the iron bars, the youth's delicate face was pale. Mommy, Daddy, can you hear me? Mommy. Yu. A series of urgent calls finally woke him up. When he woke up again, he was in Muyaja's arms. He seemed to have fainted. Muyaja and Yunshishir were scared out of their wits. They kept patting his face until he finally woke up. However, when he opened his eyes, a line of tears suddenly fell from the corner of his eyes. Yunshishir was shocked to see his tears. Just as she was about to caress his face, she saw a helpless look on the child's face. Mommy, he called her anxiously and frowned slightly. Chapter 3607. Yunshishir was so excited and happy that he had taken the initiative to call her. For a moment, she was caught off guard. Just as she was about to hug him, the child in her arms suddenly pounced on her and hugged her tightly. His little hands hugged her tighter and tighter. Mommy. Yu missed you so much. Muyaja was also stunned. Yunshishir was also stunned. That familiar voice was enough to make her heart burn. Yunshishir hugged him even tighter in surprise. Yu, you're back? Is that you? Yu. Gong Jia had told her about Yu's situation. Yu had dual personalities. One was the son of light, and the other was the son of darkness. One side was pure and innocent, while the other side was evil and cruel. Gong Jia said that Yu's memory had been sealed, but his first personality had been killed by his second personality. Perhaps his memory could be recovered, but the innocent and kind Yu of the past might not be able to come back. When Yunshishir first heard about this, she was shocked and flustered. She didn't know anything about dual personalities, nor did she know anything about the dark side. Her Yu was so pure and innocent. How could he be so cruel? But after that, she kept reading up on all kinds of information about dissociative identity disorder and dual personalities. There had always been many conflicts in the field of dissociative identity disorder. After all, the research in this field wasn't very deep. There weren't many patients with dissociative identity disorder in the world. However, some said that the first personality wouldn't be taken over by the other personalities. Some said that not only would the first personality be killed and taken over, but once another personality took over the body, the person would never be able to come back. Yunshishir was also mentally prepared that Yu of the past would never be able to come back. Even though Yu had changed and had become cold and reclusive, she didn't dare to ask for more if he could come back alive. As long as Yu was safe and by her side, she would do her best to take good care of him. Even if the Yu of the past couldn't come back to her side, she didn't care. But in her heart, she still hoped for a miracle to happen. Even though this process might be more difficult than carrying a child for 10 months, she wasn't afraid. She also hoped that the Yu of the past could come back to her side. Yu, are you back? Yunshishir, Yu. She was so excited that she hugged Yu tightly and burst out in tears. However, the crying of the child in her arms gradually stopped until it was dead silent and did not make a single sound. You, 2, you, oh, oh, you. Oh. Of you, oh. Why are you crying? Yu asked. Suddenly, he frowned and touched the corners of his eyes with his fingers. What he touched were the dried tears. Why, was he crying too? Yu frowned strangely and wiped the tears away. Xianxia looked at him nervously and didn't move. She tried calling out to him carefully, Yu? Yu looked at her coldly. He didn't respond or reject her. Just like before, his face was cold and emotionless. Xianxia's heart sank to the bottom of the abyss. Yu had disappeared again.